The first thing Ethan Caldwell heard wasn't the judge's voice. It was the sound of a chair scraping across the polished courtroom floor. Then another, and another. Within seconds, every member of his billionaire family was on their feet. His father adjusted his tailored suit without looking at him. His mother clutched her designer handbag, her eyes fixed on the exit. His younger brother, the same man Ethan had protected his entire life, walked past him as though they were strangers. Not one of them said goodbye. Not one of them whispered, "We'll be waiting." They simply left. The heavy courtroom doors closed behind them, with a hollow thud that echoed louder than any verdict ever could. For the first time in 34 years, Ethan Caldwell understood what true loneliness felt like. The reporters scribbled frantically. The spectators exchanged uneasy glances. Even the judge paused, surprised by the silence that followed. Then, the courtroom doors opened again. A woman stepped inside. She wasn't dressed like a billionaire. She carried no briefcase, no legal documents, no security team, only a quiet determination that somehow commanded more attention than everyone else in the room. She walked straight toward the man the world had already condemned. She took the empty seat beside him. Without saying a word, she reached for his trembling hand. Ethan closed his eyes. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. She looked at him with the same gentle smile she'd worn on their wedding day. "I promised God I'd stand beside my husband," she said softly. "I didn't add any conditions." At that moment, the wealthiest family in America had abandoned him. But the one person with nothing to gain had chosen to stay. That single decision would expose decades of hidden lies, shatter one of the nation's most powerful business dynasties, and teach everyone inside that courtroom a lesson no amount of money could ever buy. But none of them knew that yet. To understand why Ethan Caldwell was sitting alone before a judge, why his own family turned their backs on him, and why one woman's quiet act of loyalty would change not only his life, but theirs as well, we have to go back 18 months. To a time when Ethan still believed that being born into one of America's richest families was the greatest blessing a man could receive. Welcome to Love Stories, by Mr. Johnson, where every story reminds us that love is measured not by the promises people make when life is easy, but by the choices they make when everything falls apart. If heartfelt stories about love, resilience, forgiveness, and second chances inspire you, you're in the right place. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable journey. And as you watch, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If everyone you loved walked away from you in your darkest hour, who do you believe would still be standing beside you? Now, let's go back to where it all began. The first time anyone called Ethan Caldwell the future of the Caldwell Empire, he was only 8 years old. He didn't understand what an empire was. He only understood that his father smiled for exactly 3 seconds after he correctly answered a question about the stock market during a family dinner. 3 seconds. That was the longest smile Richard Caldwell had ever given his son. Ethan would spend the next 26 years trying to earn another one. 18 months before the courtroom, the Manhattan skyline shimmered beneath the morning sun as Ethan's black sedan glided through the streets toward Caldwell Industries headquarters. The 58-story glass tower dominated the financial district like a monument to success. Employees often joked that if you looked closely enough, you could see ambition reflected in every window. For Ethan, it looked more like a prison built from polished steel and expensive expectations. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," the security guard greeted with practiced enthusiasm. "Morning, Frank." Frank smiled. "Big board meeting today?" "You could say that." The elevator doors closed. The silence inside felt heavier than the chatter outside. Ethan loosened his tie and stared at his reflection in the mirrored wall. 34 years old, perfectly tailored navy suit, immaculate haircut, confident posture. To everyone else, he looked exactly like the man destined to inherit one of America's largest investment firms. Only Ethan knew how exhausting it was to wear confidence every single day. The elevator chimed. "Executive floor." The doors opened onto a world of marble floors, modern artwork, and employees who straightened the moment they saw him. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell." "Good morning. Coffee is already in your office. The presentation is waiting for your review." The Japanese investors arrived early. Every sentence reminded him of the role he played. Not Ethan. Mr. Caldwell, the future CEO, the dependable eldest son, the man who always had the answers. No one ever asked if he was tired. No one imagined he might not want this life. His office overlooked Central Park. Most people would have killed for that view. Ethan barely noticed it anymore. He placed his leather briefcase on the desk just as his assistant, Claire, entered carrying a folder. "Your father moved the strategy meeting to 9 instead of 10. Ethan sighed. "Of course he did. He said punctuality is a competitive advantage." Ethan chuckled quietly. "That sounds like him." Claire hesitated. You worked until almost midnight again. I'm fine. You've said that every day this week. I'm still fine. She smiled politely, though neither of them believed it. As she turned to leave, Ethan thanked her. It was a small thing, but Claire appreciated it. Richard Caldwell rarely thanked anyone. At exactly 9 o'clock, the boardroom doors closed. Richard Caldwell stood at the head of the polished conference table. Even at 65, he carried himself like a man who believed weakness was contagious. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His voice was calm, controlled, precise. We're here because average companies react. He clicked the remote. A financial chart appeared. Great companies anticipate. Around the table, executives scribbled notes. Richard turned toward Ethan. Explain the European acquisition. Ethan stood smoothly. The presentation lasted 20 minutes. Every figure, every projection, every risk assessment, he knew them by heart. When he finished, several executives nodded with visible admiration. One even whispered, "Brilliant." Richard remained expressionless. Finally he spoke. Slide 14. Ethan clicked backward. The currency forecast. You used last quarter's inflation estimate. It changed yesterday. The room became silent. Ethan looked again. His father was right. One number. One tiny percentage. Everything else had been flawless. Richard closed the folder in front of him. If you're preparing to lead this company, perfection isn't impressive. He paused. It's expected. No anger. No raised voice. Just disappointment, delivered with surgical precision. The meeting continued, as though nothing had happened. Inside, Ethan felt 8 years old again. When the executives left, Richard called him back. Close the door. Ethan obeyed. His father stood beside the window overlooking Manhattan. You know why this company survived 3 recessions? Ethan already knew the answer. Because we adapted. No. Richard turned. Because I never allowed emotion to influence decisions. He walked closer. You have your mother's heart. The sentence sounded almost like praise. It wasn't. In business, compassion clouds judgment. I'm aware. Are you? Richard folded his hands. You thanked your assistant this morning. Ethan blinked. You noticed? I notice everything. Richard's expression hardened. Employees are not family. They're people. They're payroll. The words landed like cold rain. Richard continued. If they begin seeing you as a friend instead of a leader, they'll stop respecting authority. Ethan didn't argue. Experience had taught him arguments accomplished nothing. Richard placed a hand on his son's shoulder. For a brief second, Ethan hoped. Maybe this time, maybe, you'll understand after I'm gone. Then his father walked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the enormous boardroom. Once again, still chasing a smile that never came. For the first time that day, Ethan allowed himself to breathe. He waited until the executive floor had emptied before loosening his tie again. The silence in his office felt different now, not peaceful but heavy, as though every conversation with his father left another invisible weight on his shoulders. His phone buzzed. He expected another email from the board. Instead, a text appeared. Unknown number. Hi, I think you accidentally left your notebook at Riverside Cafe this morning. If it's yours, I promise I haven't read your secrets. Well, not intentionally. A second message followed. Unless your secret is that you have terrible handwriting, then I'm definitely judging you. For the first time all day, Ethan smiled. He looked beside his laptop. His worn black leather notebook, the one he carried everywhere, was gone. Inside were business notes, random ideas, and something no one at Caldwell Industries knew he kept. A journal. Not daily entries. Just thoughts. Questions. Dreams he never dared say aloud. He typed back. Thank you. It is mine. I can pick it up whenever is convenient. The reply came almost instantly. I'm still at the cafe. Window seat, blue sweater. Try not to look too serious when you come in. 30 minutes later, Ethan stepped into Riverside Cafe. It was nothing like the restaurants his family frequented. There were no crystal chandeliers, no maitre d' greeting wealthy clients by name. Just the smell of fresh coffee, soft jazz playing overhead, and people talking as though they actually enjoyed one another's company. It felt alive. Near the window sat a woman in a blue sweater, exactly as she'd described. She was reading a book while stirring a cup of tea. When she noticed him looking around, she raised the notebook with a grin. You must be Ethan. He blinked. I don't remember introducing myself. She pointed to the embossed initials on the cover. E.C. He laughed softly. I suppose that gave it away. You also look like someone who has been looking for this all afternoon. She handed it to him. I didn't read it. I appreciate that. I was tempted. I believe you. She leaned back. You shouldn't. He laughed again. You really didn't. I know. She extended her hand. I'm Maya. Ethan. Her handshake was warm and confident, not the stiff, calculated greeting he exchanged with investors every day. So, she said, tilting her head, what does someone like you write in a notebook they panic over losing? Mostly work. Mostly? He hesitated. Thoughts. What kind of thoughts? The kind people don't usually say out loud. She smiled knowingly. Those are usually the important ones. Something about her made silence feel comfortable instead of awkward. You look exhausted, Maya observed. Ethan instinctively straightened his posture. I've had a busy day. No. She shook her head gently. You look emotionally exhausted. The words caught him off guard. Most people noticed his expensive watch, his tailored suit, his polished shoes. No one had ever looked at him and seen fatigue. He chuckled uneasily. Is that your professional opinion? I'm a children's therapist. He raised an eyebrow. You analyze adults too? Only the ones who accidentally walk around carrying the weight of the world. He looked away. I don't carry the weight of the world. No. She smiled softly. Just your own. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt seen. Not admired. Not envied. Seen. I'm guessing you're in finance, Maya said. Is it that obvious? You checked your phone 6 times in the first 5 minutes. I did? You also apologized to the barista for being distracted. I don't remember that. You did. She smiled. And you thanked her. Ethan shrugged. My parents taught me manners. She studied him for a moment. No. What? They taught you etiquette. He frowned. There's a difference. Manners come from empathy. Etiquette comes from image. The sentence lingered between them. He had never thought about it that way. Before he could respond, Maya glanced at her watch. I should go. So soon? She smiled. I have an appointment with a 7-year-old who believes monsters live under his bed. And do they? They're usually somewhere else. He laughed. Thank you. For what? For returning my notebook. She stood, slipping her book into her bag. I think it found its way back to the right person. As she started toward the door, she turned back. Oh, Ethan? Yes? Whatever's making you so tired. Oh, she gave him a gentle smile. I hope one day you realize you don't have to carry it alone. Then, she was gone. Ethan remained seated, long after his coffee had gone cold. He couldn't remember the last time a conversation had nothing to do with quarterly profits, market trends, or shareholder expectations. No one had asked him what he did for a living. No one had tried to impress him. No one seemed to care about the Caldwell name. It was refreshing. His phone buzzed again. Richard Caldwell. He answered immediately. Yes, father? Where are you? Getting coffee. With whom? He glanced toward the empty doorway Maya had walked through. By myself. There was a brief pause. The board approved the acquisition. That's good news. It would have been better if your presentation hadn't contained an error. Ethan closed his eyes. I corrected it. You shouldn't have needed to. Another pause. I expect you at dinner tonight. I'll be there. The line went dead. No goodbye. No. How was your day? Just expectations. Ethan slipped the phone back into his pocket and stared at the notebook Maya had returned. He opened it to the last page. There, written weeks earlier in his own handwriting, was a question he'd almost forgotten he'd asked himself. If I stopped being useful, would anyone still love me? He read it twice, then quietly closed the notebook. For the first time, he wondered if he'd been asking the wrong people all along. That evening, the Caldwell estate glittered beneath the fading sunset. The mansion stood on acres of manicured grounds in Greenwich, Connecticut, a place where everything looked flawless from the outside. Inside, perfection was expected, not celebrated. Expected. The dining table stretched nearly 20 feet, set with fine china that had been in the family for generations. Richard sat at one end. His wife, Victoria, sat opposite him. Ethan took his usual seat. A few moments later, his younger brother, Daniel, strolled in wearing an expensive suit and an easy smile. Sorry I'm late, Daniel said casually. Traffic. Richard barely looked up. Sit down. Dinner began with polite conversation about the markets. Then Richard turned to Ethan. The European acquisition is complete. Yes. You'll oversee the integration. Of course. Daniel smirked as he sipped his wine. Looks like another month of 80-hour weeks for Big Brother. Richard ignored the remark. Success demands sacrifice. Ethan nodded automatically. But Maya's words echoed in his mind. You don't have to carry it alone. He looked around the enormous dining room. 4 people, 1 family, not a single genuine conversation, not a single laugh, not a single question about how anyone was really doing. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel like home. It felt like the most expensive place in America to feel completely alone. Before we continue Ethan's journey, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you had to earn someone's love or approval, no matter how hard you tried? If that part of Ethan's story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Your story might encourage someone else who needs to hear they're not alone. And if you're enjoying this journey so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Because in the next chapter, Ethan meets the woman who will challenge everything he believes about love, success, and what truly makes a person worthy. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. If Ethan Caldwell had known that walking into Riverside Cafe that rainy Tuesday morning would change the course of his life, he might have lingered just a little longer. Not because he believed in fate. The Caldwell family didn't believe in fate. They believed in preparation, planning, control. Richard Caldwell often said, "Luck is an excuse people use when they don't want to admit someone else worked harder." Ethan had grown up believing every moment of his future had already been mapped out. Graduate from an Ivy League university, join Caldwell Industries, marry a woman from a family that strengthened the business, take over the company, continue the legacy. There was never a question of what he wanted, only what was expected. Yet for the first time in years he found himself driving back to Riverside Cafe, not because he had forgotten something, but because he wanted to see someone. 3 days had passed since Maya returned his notebook. 3 days of board meetings, investor calls, financial reports. 3 days of hearing everyone's opinions except his own. As he stepped inside the cafe, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee greeted him. He looked toward the window. She was there. This time, she noticed him immediately. "I was wondering if you'd come back." "You were?" She smiled. "I figured you had 2 reasons. And those are? You either wanted to thank me properly." She lifted an eyebrow. "Or you realized your handwriting wasn't as embarrassing as you thought." He laughed. "I'll admit it." "So which one?" "Neither." "Oh?" "I just wanted another conversation." For a brief moment, Maya seemed genuinely surprised. Then she smiled. "I like honest answers." They ordered coffee and found the same table by the window. Outside, people hurried beneath umbrellas, each rushing toward another obligation. Inside, time seemed to move more slowly. "So," Maya asked, "what do you do when you're not rescuing notebooks?" "I'm in finance." She narrowed her eyes playfully. "That's the safe answer. It happens to be true." "I didn't ask what you do." She leaned forward. "I asked who you are." The question caught him off guard. Who was he? The answer should have been easy. Instead, his mind filled with titles. Executive Vice President, future CEO, oldest Caldwell son. None of them sounded like a person. Finally he shrugged. "I don't really know." She didn't laugh. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She simply nodded. "That's one of the bravest answers I've ever heard." "What about you?" Ethan asked. "You know I'm a therapist." "I know what you do." He smiled. "But who are you?" She laughed softly. "Touché." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I grew up in Atlanta. My mother was a public school teacher. My father drove city buses. We didn't have much money, but we had dinner together every night." She smiled at the memory. "My parents believed no problem was too big for a conversation." Ethan listened quietly. She continued. "When someone had a bad day, we talked. When someone failed, we talked. When someone succeeded, we celebrated together." She looked at him. "What was dinner like at your house?" Ethan looked out the window. "Efficient." She waited. "That doesn't sound like an answer." "It is." He sighed. "We discussed business, current events, the economy." My father usually corrected someone's mistake. "And afterward, we went back to work." "No games?" "No." "No stories?" "No." "No asking how everyone's doing?" He shook his head. "I honestly don't remember anyone asking that." Maya's expression softened. "I'm sorry." The words surprised him. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because everyone deserves a place where they can simply be themselves." He stared into his coffee. "I wouldn't know what that feels like." Over the next several weeks, Riverside Cafe became their place. Sometimes they met before work. Sometimes after. Sometimes for only 20 minutes. Other times, they talked until the employees stacked chairs around them. The conversations never felt forced. With Maya, Silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. One evening she asked, "Can I ask you something personal?" "You've already asked several." She laughed. "Fair enough. What scares you the most?" He answered without thinking. "Disappointing people." She tilted her head. "Everyone?" "No." "Who?" He hesitated. "My father." "And second?" "Myself." She looked at him carefully. "Those answers sound connected." He looked away. "They probably are." A week later, Maya invited Ethan to a community center where she volunteered every Thursday evening. Children filled the gymnasium with laughter. Some were painting, others were reading. A few were playing basketball. Ethan stood awkwardly near the entrance. "I feel out of place." Maya smiled. "So does every adult the first time." A little girl with braided pigtails ran over. "Miss Maya!" She hugged Maya tightly before noticing Ethan. "Who's he?" "This is my friend Ethan." The little girl crossed her arms. "Can he draw?" "I don't know." She looked at Ethan seriously. "Can you?" He chuckled. "Not very well." She grabbed his hand anyway. "Come on." For the next hour, Ethan sat on a tiny chair helping children color pictures. His trees looked terrible. His dogs looked like oddly shaped potatoes. The children laughed without judgment. When one little boy accidentally spilled paint across Ethan's expensive shirt, the room became silent. The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." Ethan looked down at the blue paint spreading across his white dress shirt. Then he smiled. "It's okay." The little boy blinked. "Really? It's just a shirt." Relief flooded the child's face. Maya watched from across the room. Later, as they walked toward the parking lot, she asked, "Did you notice something?" "What?" "You smiled more tonight than you have in every coffee conversation combined." He laughed quietly. "I think you're right. You also didn't check your phone once." He reached into his pocket. She was right. Not once. "I forgot I even had it." "You know why?" He shook his head. "Because for 2 hours, you weren't trying to impress anyone." Her words lingered long after they said goodnight. That Friday morning, Ethan arrived at Caldwell Industries with paint still faintly visible beneath his fingernails. Claire noticed immediately. "Mr. Caldwell." He looked up. "You seem happier." He smiled without realizing it. "Do I? You've smiled 3 times before 9 o'clock." She laughed. "I'm documenting this historic event." Before Ethan could respond, the elevator doors opened. Richard Caldwell stepped out. His sharp eyes landed on Ethan almost instantly. Then, on the tiny streak of blue paint near his cuff. "What happened to your shirt?" Ethan glanced down. "Oh, I volunteered last night." Richard frowned. "Volunteered?" "At a community center." His father's expression hardened. "You spent your evening finger painting?" "It was with children." Richard removed his glove slowly. "Ethan, you are preparing to lead a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Your time is your most valuable asset. It shouldn't be wasted." The smile disappeared from Ethan's face. For a brief moment, he remembered the laughter, the children, the paint, the freedom he had felt. Then he looked into his father's eyes, and the familiar weight settled back onto his shoulders. Ethan stood silently as his father walked past him. The executive floor returned to its usual rhythm. Phones ringing, assistants moving briskly between offices, elevator doors opening and closing. But inside Ethan, everything had gone still. Your time is your most valuable asset. Richard Caldwell had repeated those words for as long as Ethan could remember. When he was 12 and wanted to join a neighborhood baseball team. When he was 16 and wanted to spend a summer hiking with friends. When he was 23 and considered taking a month off after graduate school. Every time, the answer had been the same. Time spent on anything that doesn't build your future is time you'll never get back. Until recently, Ethan had believed him. Now he wasn't so sure. That evening, Ethan found himself back at Riverside Cafe. Maya was already there, a paperback novel resting beside her untouched tea. The moment she saw him, she smiled. "Rough day?" He managed a tired grin. "Am I becoming that easy to read?" "Not easy." She laughed softly. "Just honest." He sat across from her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt like permission to breathe. Finally, Maya asked, "Do you want advice? Or do you just need someone to listen?" Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. "No one's ever asked me that." "So?" He smiled faintly. I think I just need someone to listen." "Then I'm listening." For the next 20 minutes, Ethan talked. Not about billion-dollar acquisitions. Not about quarterly earnings. Not about board meetings. He talked about how every accomplishment seemed to disappear the moment he made one mistake. How praise in his family lasted seconds, but criticism lingered for weeks. How he sometimes felt like he was running a race whose finish line kept moving farther away. When he finally stopped, Maya didn't rush to respond. She simply asked one question. When was the last time you felt proud of yourself? He searched his memory. His college graduation, his first promotion, closing the company's largest acquisition. Each memory was immediately followed by another. His father pointing out what could have been better. His own voice, asking whether he'd done enough. After nearly a minute, he shook his head. I honestly don't know. Maya's expression softened. That's heartbreaking. She reached into her bag and pulled out a blank napkin. Can I show you something? Ethan nodded. She drew a small circle in the center. This circle is your self-worth. Then she drew several larger circles around it. Career. Money. Family approval. Reputation. She looked up. Most people accidentally build their identity like this. She tapped the outer circles. They believe these things create their value. Then she crossed them out one by one. What happens if you lose your job? She crossed out career. If the stock market crashes? She crossed out money. If people criticize you? She crossed out reputation. Finally, only the tiny circle remained. She pointed to it. If all those things disappeared tomorrow, who would Ethan be? He stared at the napkin. No financial report had ever challenged him this much. I don't know. She smiled gently. That's okay. Most people spend their whole lives trying to answer that question. A week later, Maya invited Ethan to meet her parents. They're having a barbecue, she said. My dad insists no one should spend a Saturday working. Ethan laughed. He and my father would disagree on almost everything. That's probably true. You don't have to come if you're uncomfortable. He surprised himself by answering immediately. I'd like to. The Johnson family home was modest but welcoming. Children rode bicycles up and down the quiet street. Neighbors waved from their porches. Someone nearby was playing old soul music. The smell of grilled chicken filled the warm summer air. Before Ethan could knock, the front door opened. A cheerful woman wrapped Maya in a hug. My baby! Then she noticed Ethan. So this is Ethan. She smiled as though she'd known him for years. I'm Denise. Before Ethan could introduce himself, a booming voice called from the backyard. Maya, tell our guest to come save these burgers before I burn dinner. Her father appeared wearing an apron that read, King of the Grill. He walked over with an easy smile and extended his hand. You must be Ethan. Yes, sir. The older man laughed. Don't sir me. I'm Harold. If you're eating my food, we're already on a first-name basis. Ethan smiled. It felt strange, in the best possible way. The afternoon passed with laughter, stories, and endless teasing. Harold proudly showed Ethan the vegetable garden he'd spent years cultivating. Denise insisted everyone take home leftovers. Maya's younger cousins challenged Ethan to a game of basketball. He lost badly. No one cared. As the sun began to set, everyone gathered around the patio table with homemade peach cobbler. Harold raised his glass. To family. Everyone echoed the toast. Ethan hesitated, then quietly lifted his own glass. Family. The word felt different here. Not because these people were perfect, because they made room for imperfection. Later that evening, while helping Harold wash dishes, Ethan spoke almost absent-mindedly. I've never seen a family like yours. Harold smiled without looking up. What do you mean? You all actually enjoy being together. Harold chuckled. Most days. He rinsed another plate. We argue. We get annoyed. We disappoint each other. But we always come back to the table. He looked at Ethan. You know why? Ethan shook his head. Because people matter more than pride. The sentence settled deep inside him. Harold continued. My father taught me something I'll never forget. He dried his hands with a towel. He used to say, son, don't build a house so big that there's no room left for love inside it. Ethan swallowed hard. His mind drifted to the Caldwell mansion. 40,000 square feet. Dozens of rooms. Enough space for every luxury imaginable. Yet somehow, no one ever lingered around the dinner table. No one stayed just to talk. As they drove home that night, the car was unusually quiet. Finally, Maya glanced toward him. You're thinking, I am. About what? He smiled faintly. Your father. What about him? He made me feel welcome. She reached across the center console and gently squeezed his hand. Because he meant it. Another long silence followed. Then Ethan asked quietly, Maya. Yes? If someone spends their entire life trying to earn love. He paused. Can they ever learn another way? She looked out the windshield before answering. I think so. How? She turned back toward him, her voice calm and certain. One honest relationship at a time. Over the following months, Ethan found himself changing in ways he never expected. He still worked long hours. He still attended board meetings. He still carried enormous responsibility. But now, once a week, he volunteered at the community center. He called his mother simply to ask how she was doing, even when the conversations were brief. He started leaving the office before midnight. Sometimes, he and Maya walked through Central Park, with nothing on the schedule except talking. For the first time in years, he wasn't just building a career, he was building a life. He didn't realize that someone else had begun paying very close attention. One evening, as Ethan walked Maya to her apartment after dinner, a black luxury sedan sat quietly across the street. Inside, Richard Caldwell watched from the back seat. He said nothing. His expression never changed. But when his driver asked, "Should I pull away, sir?" Richard's eyes remained fixed on his son laughing with Maya beneath a street lamp. Finally, he answered in a cold, measured voice. "No. I've seen enough." The sedan disappeared into the night. Neither Ethan nor Maya noticed. But before the week was over, Richard Caldwell would make one thing painfully clear. In the Caldwell family, love was never allowed to interfere with legacy. The invitation wasn't written on paper. It came through Ethan's assistant at exactly 8:15 Monday morning. "Mr. Caldwell," Claire said quietly as she stepped into his office. "Your father wants you in his private office." Ethan looked up from his laptop. "Did he say why?" She hesitated. "No." That alone told him everything. Richard Caldwell never invited people into his office for casual conversations. He summoned them. There was a difference. The executive elevator climbed to the top floor, where only one office occupied the entire level. Richard believed leaders shouldn't share space. "Privacy encourages clarity," he often said. Ethan had always suspected it encouraged distance. When the elevator doors opened, Richard's executive assistant stood immediately. "He's expecting you." Of course he was. Richard was a man who expected everything. Ethan knocked once. "Come in." The office looked exactly as it always had. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. A single bookshelf lined one wall, filled not with family photographs, but biographies of industrialists, presidents, and military strategists. There wasn't a single personal picture anywhere in the room. No wedding photo. No childhood memories. Nothing that suggested the man behind the desk had ever lived a life outside business. Richard didn't look up immediately. He finished signing a document before setting down his fountain pen. Finally, he met Ethan's eyes. "Sit." Ethan obeyed. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Richard believed silence made people uncomfortable enough to reveal themselves. It usually worked. "I received a report this morning," Richard finally began. Ethan waited. "Apparently you've been volunteering." "Yes. Every Thursday." "That's right." Richard folded his hands. "And this has been going on for several months." "Yes." "Interesting." The word carried no warmth. "You've also been seen leaving work before 8 o'clock." "I've completed my responsibilities." "That's not what I asked." Ethan remained calm. "I've been trying to create a healthier balance." Richard's expression didn't change. "Balance." He repeated the word as though tasting something unpleasant. "Do you know what balance looks like in business?" Ethan didn't answer. "It looks like mediocrity." Richard stood and walked toward the windows. "When I founded Caldwell Industries, I worked 100 hours a week. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. I sacrificed everything." He turned around. "And because I did. You grew up with opportunities 99% of Americans will never have." Ethan nodded. "I know how hard you worked." "No," Richard corrected. "You know how hard I still work." He walked back to his desk. "Greatness demands complete commitment. Half measures build average companies. And average companies disappear." Ethan chose his words carefully. "I don't disagree." Richard leaned forward. "Then explain why you've suddenly become distracted." "I'm not distracted. You've become softer." The word landed heavily, as if compassion were some kind of disease. Ethan kept his voice even. "I don't think caring about people makes someone weak." Richard's jaw tightened. "No, it makes them vulnerable." Richard opened a drawer and removed a thin folder. He slid it across the desk. Ethan looked down. Inside were photographs. Him and Maya leaving Riverside Cafe, walking through Central Park, volunteering with children, sharing dinner with her parents. His heartbeat slowed. You had someone follow me? Richard didn't deny it. I prefer the word observe. Why? Because your decisions affect this family's future. Ethan looked at the photographs again. My personal life isn't a board meeting. Richard ignored the comment. Who is she? Maya Johnson. What does she do? She's a children's therapist. Richard nodded once. And her family? They're wonderful people. I asked about their background. Ethan knew exactly what his father meant. They're middle class. Richard leaned back. I see. The room fell silent. Finally, Richard spoke. I've already arranged introductions with the daughter of Senator Whitmore. Ethan frowned. What? She's intelligent, well-educated. Her family has significant political influence. I think you'd find her suitable. Ethan stared at his father. You've arranged introductions? Richard looked genuinely confused by Ethan's reaction. Networking. No. This is my life. Richard's voice hardened. Your life represents this family. I decide who I spend time with. You decide many things. Richard replied calmly. But not everything. For the first time in years, Ethan felt anger replacing obedience. I'm seeing Maya. Richard's eyes narrowed. I gathered that. And I'm not ending the relationship. Richard stood again. You've known this woman less than a year. I don't need more time. You most certainly do. No. Richard slammed one hand lightly against the desk. Infatuation clouds judgment. Ethan stood as well. This isn't infatuation. You don't know that. I do. You think you do. The tension between them filled the room. Neither man looked away. Finally, Richard spoke with icy calm. The Caldwell name carries responsibilities. So does being a decent human being. Richard's expression darkened. Don't confuse emotion with wisdom. I'm not. I'm learning they aren't opposites. Richard walked back toward the window. Without turning around, he said quietly, When your mother married me. She understood the family came first. Ethan answered just as quietly. Maybe that's why she's always looked lonely. The words escaped before he could stop them. The office became deathly silent. Richard turned slowly. His face revealed nothing. But his eyes had gone cold. You may leave. Ethan didn't move. I said, you may leave. Without another word, Ethan walked out. The elevator doors closed behind him. His hands were trembling, not because he feared his father, because for the first time in his life, he had spoken honestly, and honesty, he realized, had a price. That evening, Ethan arrived at Riverside Cafe later than usual. Maya looked up the moment he entered. You look like you've been carrying a mountain. He forced a smile. Close. She waited until he sat down. What happened? He hesitated. Then, for the first time since they'd met, he told her everything. About the photographs, about the surveillance, about his father's expectations, about the woman he'd been expected to marry. Maya listened without interrupting. When he finally finished, she reached across the table. Ethan. I'm sorry. He looked confused. For what? For making your life harder. He shook his head immediately. No. You've made it better. But your family. My family made this decision. He squeezed her hand. You didn't. She looked into his eyes. Are you sure? For the first time since leaving his father's office, Ethan smiled. A real smile. I've never been more sure of anything. But neither of them knew. Richard Caldwell had already decided this relationship wasn't just a distraction. And Richard Caldwell had never allowed threats to remain unchallenged. The following Saturday morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. For years, his mornings had followed the same pattern. Wake at 5. Answer emails before getting out of bed. Read overnight market reports. Exercise. Leave for the office before the city was fully awake. It was a routine built on discipline. Or at least, that's what he'd always called it. Lately, Maya had given it a different name. You don't have a routine. She'd told him one evening with a teasing smile. You have an escape plan. He had laughed at the time. Now, lying awake in the quiet of his penthouse, he wondered if she had been right. How many years had he spent staying busy simply so he wouldn't have to think? By 8 o'clock, he was walking through Central Park with 2 coffees in his hands. Maya was waiting on their favorite bench, dressed in jeans, a light sweater, and running shoes. You actually took a Saturday off, she said, accepting the coffee. I almost cancelled. I know. You know? You texted me 3 times asking if we could move it to this afternoon. She smiled knowingly, and then once asking if next weekend would be better. Ethan laughed. I guess I did. She nudged him playfully. You're addicted to work. I prefer committed. No. She grinned. Committed people know how to rest. You. She pointed at him. Don't. They strolled along the walking paths as joggers and families filled the park. A little boy chased bubbles across the grass. An elderly couple danced to the sound of a violinist near Bethesda Terrace. A young father struggled to assemble a toy kite, while his daughter offered enthusiastic, but completely incorrect, advice. Maya smiled as she watched them. Do you know what's interesting? What? Nobody here is trying to impress anyone. Ethan looked around. She was right. No one cared what kind of car someone drove. No one asked about salaries. No one seemed interested in titles. People were simply living. It's different, he admitted. It's peaceful. She looked at him. You deserve peace too. The words settled quietly in his heart. No one had ever told him he deserved peace. Only that he had to earn success. As they continued walking, Maya suddenly stopped in front of a street artist selling hand-painted landscapes. One painting caught her attention. It showed an old wooden bridge crossing a calm river at sunset. It's beautiful, she whispered. The artist smiled. It reminds me that the strongest bridges aren't the ones made of steel. Maya looked intrigued. What are they made of? The elderly man chuckled. Trust. He pointed toward the painting. Steel can carry weight, but trust carries people. Ethan found himself staring at the artwork. Without thinking, he bought it. As they walked away carrying the wrapped canvas, Maya laughed. You know you didn't have to buy that. I know. Then why did you? He smiled. Because I needed the reminder. That afternoon, Ethan received a call from his mother. It surprised him. Victoria Caldwell rarely phoned anyone. Ethan, hi Mom. Her voice was softer than usual. Would you have lunch with me tomorrow? He paused. Just us? Yes. I'd like that. So would I. The next day, they met at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. Victoria arrived wearing her usual elegance. Pearl earrings, cream-colored blazer, perfect posture. To most people, she appeared composed. To Ethan, she looked tired. After the waiter left, she folded her napkin carefully. Your father told me about your conversation. I assumed he would. She gave him a faint smile. He wasn't happy. I noticed. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Victoria sighed. I need you to understand something. I'm listening. She looked out toward the water. When I married your father, I thought ambition and love could exist together. She smiled sadly. They can, but only if ambition knows its limits. Ethan watched his mother closely. She continued. I kept telling myself that once the company became successful, he'd slow down. Then, I thought after you children were older, he'd slow down. Her smile faded. There was always another goal. Another acquisition. Another reason family had to wait. She met Ethan's eyes, and one day I realized. I had spent 25 years waiting. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Mom. She reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. I don't want that life for you. He blinked. What? I don't want you waking up one day beside someone you love, only to realize you've been too busy chasing approval to actually know them. Those words hit him harder than any criticism his father had ever delivered. For years, he'd assumed his mother agreed with Richard. Now he realized she had simply learned to survive him. Does Dad know you feel this way? Victoria smiled sadly. No. Why not? Because people can become so committed to being right. They stop listening. She took a sip of tea. But you still have time. Time for what? To choose differently. When lunch ended, Victoria hugged her son. It wasn't formal. It wasn't brief. It was the kind of hug a mother gives when words aren't enough. As Ethan walked toward his car, he realized something painful. He couldn't remember the last time she'd hugged him. Maybe she couldn't either. Monday morning brought another board meeting. This time, Richard entered, carrying a thick folder. Gentlemen, he began, I have exciting news. He projected architectural renderings onto the large screen. We've secured preliminary approval for the largest expansion in company history. The room erupted in applause. Richard smiled. It was the same smile Ethan had spent decades trying to earn. Then Richard continued. This project will require complete commitment. He looked directly at Ethan. There can be no distractions. The words were aimed at everyone. The message was aimed at one person. After the meeting, Daniel caught up with Ethan near the elevators. So? Ethan looked at his younger brother. So? I heard Dad finally met your girlfriend. He hasn't met her. Daniel smirked. Same difference. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Daniel shrugged. It means you know how Dad works. He'll never approve. I don't need his approval. Daniel laughed. You keep telling yourself that. The elevator doors opened. Before stepping inside, Daniel added quietly, You've always cared what he thinks. And, if you're honest, you still do. The doors closed, leaving Ethan alone with a truth he wasn't ready to admit. Because Daniel wasn't entirely wrong. A part of him still wanted the impossible. To build a life with Maya, without disappointing his father. He hadn't yet accepted that some choices require letting go of the approval you've spent your entire life chasing. And soon, life would force him to choose. For a while, Ethan believed he could have both. He could be the devoted husband Maya deserved, and the flawless son Richard Caldwell expected. He convinced himself that if he worked a little harder, slept a little less, and carried a little more, eventually everything would settle into place. He had always solved problems that way. Work longer, push harder, say less. But there was one problem with carrying every burden alone. No one notices how heavy it has become until you finally collapse. 3 months later, the expansion project Richard had announced became the largest undertaking in Caldwell Industries history. Executives flew in from London, Singapore, Frankfurt, and Tokyo. Conference rooms stayed occupied well past midnight. Entire departments were reorganized. Every decision required Ethan's approval before it reached Richard's desk. His calendar became a battlefield. Monday, meetings from 7 in the morning until almost 10 at night. Tuesday, investor conference, legal review, strategy session. Wednesday, flight to Chicago. Thursday, back to New York. Friday, dinner with international partners. Saturday, emergency board meeting. Sunday, Richard scheduled another strategy session anyway. Somewhere between all those commitments, life quietly slipped away. The first thing Ethan stopped doing was volunteering. I'll be back next Thursday, he promised the children. Next Thursday came. He cancelled. The Thursday after that, another cancellation. Eventually the children stopped asking Maya where Mr. Ethan was. That hurt her more than she expected. Then came the missed dinners. At first, Ethan always called, I'm so sorry. The meeting ran long. I'll make it up to you. And he meant every word. Maya believed him. Until, I'll make it up to you, became more common than actually showing up. One rainy evening, Maya carefully set 2 plates on their dining table. She had spent hours cooking Ethan's favorite meal. Her grandmother's baked macaroni and cheese, garlic herb chicken, roasted vegetables, homemade peach cobbler cooling on the counter. The apartment smelled warm, comforting, like home. She checked the time, 7 o'clock. He should have been there. At 7:20, her phone buzzed. Ethan, I'm so sorry, something came up, don't wait for me. She stared at the message. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed, It's okay. Then erased it. She typed again, Be safe. Then erased that too. Finally, she simply replied, Okay. 1 word. Sometimes 1 word carries more disappointment than an entire argument. At 10:45 that night, Ethan quietly unlocked the apartment door. The lights were off, except for the small lamp beside the couch. Maya was asleep, or pretending to be. The untouched dinner still sat on the table. He walked closer. Every plate remained exactly where she'd placed it. 2 glasses, 2 forks, 2 folded napkins, 1 empty chair. His chest tightened. He gently covered the food with aluminum foil before placing it in the refrigerator. When he finally climbed into bed, Maya spoke softly without opening her eyes. How was your meeting? He hesitated. It went well. I'm glad. Silence. Then she whispered, I missed you. Those 3 words hurt more than anger ever could. The following Saturday, Ethan promised they would spend the entire day together. No meetings, no phone, no laptop. Just us. Maya smiled. I'd like that. She planned everything. Breakfast at their favorite cafe, a walk through the botanical gardens, an afternoon street festival, dinner by the waterfront. Simple, uncomplicated, exactly what they needed. At 9:30 that morning, while they were finishing breakfast, Ethan's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Richard. He declined the call. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Maya reached across the table. You should answer. It's Saturday. I know. But, if you don't, you won't be present anyway. He sighed and answered. Yes, father? Richard's voice was sharp. Where are you? I'm with Maya. I need you at the office. It's my day off. This acquisition doesn't recognize weekends. Ethan closed his eyes. Can it wait until Monday? No. The line went silent. Then Richard added, if leadership has become optional for you, perhaps succession should become optional as well. The call ended. Ethan stared at the phone. Maya didn't ask what Richard had said. She already knew. You should go, she said quietly. I'm sorry. No, really. I know. She forced a smile. I'll see you tonight. Instead of dinner by the waterfront. Maya spent the afternoon walking alone through the botanical gardens. She watched elderly couples holding hands, parents chasing toddlers through flower displays, teenagers laughing over melting ice cream. Everywhere she looked, people made time for each other, not because they had extra hours, because they chose to. She sat on a quiet bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. For the first time since meeting Ethan, she wondered whether love could survive a life where work always came first. Not because he didn't love her. She never doubted that. She questioned whether love alone was enough. That evening, Ethan didn't return until after midnight. He found Maya reading on the balcony. The city lights reflected across the river below. She looked peaceful. Too peaceful. He knew that expression. It wasn't anger. It was resignation. I'm sorry. She closed the book gently. Ethan, can I ask you something? Anything. When you're with me. She paused. Are you actually here? He frowned. What do you mean? I mean, your body sits beside me. But your mind. It's always solving tomorrow's problems. He didn't know how to answer. Because she was right. She looked out across the skyline. I don't need expensive vacations. I don't need fancy gifts. I don't need a bigger apartment. She turned back toward him. I just need my husband. Her words echoed in the quiet night. Ethan walked toward her. I am your husband. She smiled sadly. I know, but lately. It feels like I'm sharing you with a company that always wins. He reached for her hand. She let him hold it. But for the first time, he realized holding someone's hand wasn't the same as truly being there. And unless something changed soon, he wouldn't just lose moments. He might lose the very relationship that had taught him what unconditional love looked like. The conversation on the balcony lingered in Ethan's mind for days. Not because Maya had raised her voice. She hadn't. Not because she had threatened to leave. She never did. It was the quiet sadness in her eyes that unsettled him. Richard's disappointment always made Ethan work harder. Maya's disappointment made him question who he was becoming. For the first time in years, success no longer felt like victory. It felt like a trade, and he wasn't sure the price was worth paying. The following Thursday, Ethan promised himself he would leave the office by 6. No excuses, no delays. He even blocked the time on his calendar. Dinner with Maya. Non-negotiable. At 5:42 p.m., Claire stepped into his office carrying a folder. Her usual calm expression had vanished. Ethan. She rarely called him Ethan during office hours. We've got a problem. He looked up immediately. What happened? The compliance department found inconsistencies in 3 international accounts tied to the Meridian expansion. He frowned. What kind of inconsistencies? Transfers. Large ones. They don't match the authorization records. Ethan stood. Could it be a reporting error? Claire shook her head. I wish it were. 20 minutes later, the executive conference room was filled with senior managers. Financial statements covered the table. Projectors displayed transaction histories. Everyone spoke at once. Richard entered without a word. The room immediately fell silent. He scanned the reports. Explain. The chief financial officer cleared his throat. Several overseas transfers were approved using executive credentials. Richard looked directly at Ethan. Were they yours? No. You've reviewed these accounts personally. I have. Then how were they missed? Ethan leaned over the documents. The transactions were unfamiliar, large enough that someone should have noticed them. Yet, somehow, they had slipped through multiple reviews. I don't know, he admitted. Richard's jaw tightened. I don't accept, I don't know. Neither did Ethan. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. By the time Ethan finally left the building, it was after 10. His phone showed 6 missed calls from Maya, 3 unread text messages. 6:18 p.m. Everything okay? 7:05 p.m. I'm starting dinner. Hope you're almost done. 8:41 p.m. Please just let me know you're all right. His heart sank. He called immediately. She answered on the second ring. Hi. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. I'm so sorry. I know. There was an emergency. I figured. I should have called sooner. You should have. Silence settled between them. Finally, she asked, "Are you coming home tonight?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course I am." "I wasn't sure." When Ethan arrived home, Maya was sitting at the kitchen table. Not reading, not watching television, simply waiting. A mug of tea had gone cold beside her. He walked in quietly. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "I believe you." He blinked. "You do? I know you never mean to hurt me." She looked down at her hands. But intent doesn't erase impact. The words stopped him in his tracks. She continued softly. "You apologize because you care. But nothing changes." He wanted to argue. Instead, he sat across from her. "I don't know how to fix this." Maya looked into his eyes. "Then stop trying to fix everything. Just tell me the truth." He frowned. "I am telling you the truth." "No." She shook her head gently. "You're telling me pieces of it." "What are you talking about?" She reached across the table. "When was the last time you told me you were scared?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "When was the last time you admitted you were overwhelmed?" Again, silence. "When was the last time you cried?" He looked away. "I don't." She finished the sentence for him. "Do that." "Exactly." Maya stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. "I work with children every day. I've learned something from them." She turned back toward him. "The strongest people aren't the ones who never cry. They're the ones who aren't ashamed when they do." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I don't know how." "I know," she smiled sadly. "That's what breaks my heart." The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office before sunrise. The compliance investigation had expanded overnight. Federal regulators had requested additional documentation. Outside consultants were brought in. Entire departments worked around the clock. Rumors spread through every floor of Caldwell Industries. Someone had committed fraud. No one knew who. Employees whispered in elevators. Assistants stopped talking whenever executives approached. The atmosphere felt different. Fear had replaced confidence. Claire knocked gently before entering. "I brought coffee." "Thank you." She hesitated. "You should go home." He looked up. "I just got here." "You've slept here twice this week." "I'm fine." She sighed. "No. You keep saying that." She placed the coffee on his desk. "My dad used to say something." Ethan looked at her. "When everyone keeps asking if you're okay, it's probably because you're not hiding it as well as you think." Then she quietly left. That afternoon, Ethan visited the records department. He personally reviewed hundreds of authorization forms. The signatures looked genuine. The approvals appeared legitimate. Yet something felt wrong. One document caught his attention. A transfer approval bearing his digital authorization. He stared at it. He had never approved that payment. He checked another file. Same authorization. Another. Same. A cold chill traveled down his spine. Someone wasn't just moving money. Someone was using his identity to do it. He immediately gathered copies and hurried toward Richard's office. Halfway there, he saw his younger brother Daniel step out of a restricted records room. Daniel smiled casually. "Working late again?" Ethan held up the folder. "I found something." "What?" "Someone's been using my executive credentials." Daniel's smile faded for just a fraction of a second. Then it returned. "That's serious." "It is." "You should tell Dad." "I was just about to." Daniel nodded. "Good idea." As Ethan walked away, Daniel watched him disappear down the hallway. His expression slowly changed. The easy smile vanished, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Inside Richard's office, Ethan laid the documents across the desk. "I think someone cloned my authorization access." Richard examined the papers carefully. "You have proof?" "Not yet. But these signatures aren't mine." Richard looked up. "The system says they are." "I know what the system says." "I'm telling you, I didn't approve these transfers." Richard folded his hands. "Ethan, facts matter more than feelings." "I'm not talking about feelings. I'm talking about evidence." "So am I." Richard slid the documents back across the desk. "Until you prove otherwise. These authorizations belong to you." For a long moment, father and son simply looked at one another. Ethan realized something that made his stomach tighten. His father wasn't accusing him. Not yet. But he also wasn't believing him. And for the first time in his life, the unwavering trust Ethan had always hoped to earn was nowhere to be found. Outside the office, Daniel quietly watched through the glass wall before turning and walking away. A faint smile crossed his face. Exactly as planned. The first newspaper article appeared on a Tuesday morning. It was buried near the bottom of the business section. Caldwell Industries faces internal financial review. Only 4 paragraphs long. No accusations, no dramatic headlines, just speculation. By lunchtime, every major financial website had picked up the story. By evening, the speculation had become suspicion. Inside Caldwell Industries, conversations stopped whenever Ethan walked by. Not because people believed he had done anything wrong, because no one knew what to believe. The uncertainty was almost worse. Claire noticed it before Ethan did. As they stepped into an elevator, 2 junior analysts immediately fell silent. One of them offered an awkward smile. The other stared at the floor. The elevator ride lasted only 20 seconds. It felt like 20 minutes. When the doors opened, Claire quietly said, "They're scared." Ethan nodded. "I know. They're not judging you. They're protecting themselves." He managed a faint smile. "I probably would too." That afternoon, independent forensic accountants arrived. Dozens of boxes of financial records were wheeled into secure conference rooms. Computers were copied. Email servers were archived. Executive access logs were reviewed. For the first time in the company's history, Caldwell Industries wasn't investigating another corporation. It was investigating itself. Richard called an emergency executive meeting. No one was late. No one wanted to be. Richard stood at the head of the table. "This investigation continues until every dollar is accounted for." His voice was steady. "Anyone withholding information will be terminated immediately." He looked around the room. "Our reputation was built over 40 years. It will not be destroyed by one person's dishonesty." The words echoed through the boardroom. One person's dishonesty. Ethan couldn't help noticing several executives glance in his direction. After the meeting, Daniel caught up with him near the parking garage. "You okay?" Ethan looked tired. "I've been better." Daniel slipped his hands into his pockets. "You know how Dad is. He'll calm down once everything's sorted out." "I hope so." Daniel nodded sympathetically. "I'm sure he knows you didn't mean for any of this to happen." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel looked surprised. "I just meant..." He shrugged. "You're responsible for the division. People will naturally look at you first." The words were delivered gently, almost kindly. Yet they lingered in Ethan's mind the entire drive home. Maya opened the apartment door before he reached for his keys. "I heard your car." She immediately noticed his expression. "No good news?" He shook his head. She didn't ask another question. Instead, she wrapped her arms around him. For nearly a minute, neither of them spoke. Sometimes comfort required silence more than words. When she finally stepped back, she smiled gently. "Dinner's ready." "What are we having?" "Nothing fancy." She laughed. "Just chicken soup." He looked confused. "Soup? My grandmother used to say." "What?" She smiled. "When life becomes complicated." "Eat something simple." For the first time all day, Ethan laughed. "I think I'd have liked your grandmother." "You would have. She had a way of making people feel safe." Over dinner, Maya noticed Ethan barely touched his food. "You're somewhere else." He sighed. "I keep replaying everything. The transactions. The meetings. The reports. I feel like I missed something obvious." "You probably didn't. What if I did?" She laid down her spoon. "Ethan," he looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. If someone else made a mistake, would you judge them as harshly as you're judging yourself?" He thought for a moment. "No." "Why not?" "Because people make mistakes." She smiled sadly. "And yet..." "You won't allow yourself to be human." The following morning, Ethan arrived to find federal investigators waiting in the lobby. They wore dark suits and carried identification badges. Employees pretended not to stare. No one succeeded. One investigator approached him politely. "Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes. We'd appreciate a few minutes of your time." Ethan nodded. "Of course." Richard watched the interaction from the mezzanine above. His expression remained unreadable. The interview lasted nearly 3 hours. The investigators asked about approval procedures, digital signatures, international banking regulations, internal reporting structures. Ethan answered every question honestly. When they finished, one investigator closed his notebook. "You've been very cooperative." "I have nothing to hide." "We hope that's true." The sentence wasn't accusatory. It was procedural. Still, it stayed with him. As Ethan stepped into the hallway, he saw several employees pretending to work, while clearly watching him. The whispers began almost immediately. "Was that the FBI?" "I think so." "Do you think he's involved?" I heard they questioned him for hours. Rumors have a strange way of growing. By lunchtime, people weren't discussing an interview. They were discussing an arrest that hadn't happened. Claire intercepted him before he reached his office. You shouldn't read social media. I wasn't planning to. Good. She hesitated. Someone leaked your name. His stomach tightened. Already? She nodded. The internet always moves faster than the truth. By evening, television news vans lined the street outside Caldwell Industries. Microphones, cameras, satellite trucks. Headlines flashed across national broadcasts. Executive under scrutiny in Caldwell financial probe. Questions surround heir to billion-dollar empire. Not one outlet called him guilty. None called him innocent either. Instead, they filled the silence with speculation. When Ethan finally arrived home, he found Maya sitting on the living room floor. The television was off. Her laptop sat open. She had been reading the news. She looked up slowly. I stopped after the 5th article. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. She patted the space beside her. Sit. He did. She rested her head against his shoulder. They don't know you. No. They're writing about a headline, not a husband. He closed his eyes. I don't know how much worse this is going to get. She took his hand. Then don't try to carry tomorrow tonight. He smiled weakly. You always know what to say. No. She squeezed his hand. I just know you. 2 days later, Ethan was reviewing additional financial records when loud voices echoed through the executive floor. He looked toward the hallway. Several employees had gathered near the reception desk. The elevator doors opened. 3 federal agents stepped out. This time, they weren't there for another interview. One of them approached Ethan with a sealed envelope. Mr. Ethan Caldwell? Yes. You've been served. Every conversation on the floor stopped. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Ethan accepted the envelope with trembling hands. He slowly broke the seal. His face drained of color as he read the first page. It wasn't an arrest warrant, not yet. It was a formal notice informing him that he was the primary subject of a federal criminal investigation into financial fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy involving Caldwell Industries. Across the room, Richard stood frozen. Daniel lowered his eyes, carefully hiding the satisfaction behind them. And for the first time, Ethan understood that his life had just crossed a line from which nothing would ever be the same again. By the next morning, Ethan's face was everywhere. Every business network, every financial podcast, every news website. Some outlets called him the fallen heir. Others referred to him as the executive at the center of the Caldwell investigation. None of them had all the facts, but facts had never traveled as quickly as headlines. Ethan stood in the kitchen, staring at the television without really seeing it. Maya quietly walked over and turned it off. The apartment fell silent. I need to know what's being said, Ethan murmured. No, Maya replied gently. You need to know what's true. He looked at her. There's a difference. She nodded. A very important one. She took the remote and placed it inside a drawer. For today, let the people who don't know you have their opinions. I know the man standing in this kitchen. Ethan lowered his head. I hope that's enough. She walked over and cupped his face. It has to be. By mid-morning, Caldwell Industries issued a public statement. The company announced that Ethan would be placed on temporary administrative leave while investigators completed their review. It wasn't a declaration of guilt, but the public didn't read the fine print. The only words they remembered were, Ethan Caldwell, administrative leave, federal investigation. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from reporters, former classmates, business associates, people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered support. Others wanted information. A few simply wanted to be close to the biggest story in America. Ethan ignored every message, except one. It was from Claire. Whatever happens, thank you for always treating people with respect. He stared at the text for several seconds, then quietly smiled. In a week filled with doubt. Those 12 words reminded him that kindness leaves a longer legacy than success. That afternoon, Richard requested a family meeting at the Caldwell estate. When Ethan arrived, the atmosphere felt different. No staff greeted him. No one offered coffee. The house, that had once felt emotionally distant, now felt openly hostile. Victoria met him in the hallway. She embraced him tightly. I'm glad you came. So am I. She looked toward the study. Your father's waiting. Her eyes quietly added the words she couldn't say aloud. Be careful. Richard stood beside the fireplace. Daniel leaned against the bookshelf. Several senior family attorneys occupied the leather chairs nearby. No one smiled. Richard motioned toward an empty chair. Sit. Ethan remained standing. I'd rather stand. Richard accepted that without comment. Our attorneys have reviewed the situation, and they recommend complete cooperation. I've been cooperating from the beginning. Richard nodded once. They also recommend distancing the company from anyone under investigation. The room fell silent. Ethan slowly looked from one face to another. What exactly are you saying? One of the attorneys spoke carefully. The board believes it would be appropriate for you to resign your executive position. Ethan blinked. Resign? It protects the company. I've done nothing wrong. We're aware that's your position. My position? Ethan's voice rose slightly. It's the truth. Another attorney cleared his throat. Truth and public perception are not always the same. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Finally, he looked directly at his father. Do you believe I did this? Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded his hands behind his back. I believe the investigation must take its course. That's not what I asked. Silence. I asked whether you believe your son. Victoria quietly closed her eyes. Daniel looked down at the floor. Richard finally answered, I believe evidence. The words landed harder than any accusation, because they contained none. Only distance, only caution, only the unmistakable message that Ethan had spent his entire life fearing. His father no longer trusted him. Ethan looked around the room. No one defended him. Not the attorneys, not Daniel, not even the board members attending by video conference. Everyone waited, not to hear the truth, to see which way the wind would blow. He suddenly remembered something Maya had once said. People often discover who they really are when everyone stops applauding. He finally understood what she meant. I won't resign, Ethan said quietly. One attorney adjusted his glasses. You understand the consequences? I do. Richard's expression hardened. The board can remove you. Then let them. You would damage this family to protect yourself. Ethan stared at his father. No. I'm trying to protect the truth. Richard walked toward him. For a moment, Ethan thought his father might finally place a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Instead, Richard spoke in a low voice only Ethan could hear. If you're innocent, prove it. Then he stepped back. The meeting was over. Outside the estate, the cold autumn air hit Ethan's face. He stood beside his car for several minutes without moving. His phone rang. Maya, he answered. How did it go? He couldn't speak. Not immediately. Ethan? His voice finally broke. They don't believe me. There was a long pause. Then Maya said the simplest thing. Come home. Not, we'll figure this out. Not, everything will be okay. Just, come home. And somehow, those two words felt safer than anything he'd heard all week. That evening, Ethan sat on the living room floor with his back against the couch. Maya joined him, handing him a mug of hot tea. Neither of them drank it. After several minutes, Ethan whispered, I keep thinking about something. What? My father said I should prove I'm innocent. Maya nodded. And? I've spent my whole life trying to prove myself. She looked at him. To him? He nodded. What if? His voice cracked. What if I never could? Maya gently reached for his hand. Ethan, some people don't know how to give the love we're hoping to receive. That doesn't mean we're unworthy of it. A tear rolled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away. She stopped his hand. You don't have to hide your tears from me. For the first time since the investigation began, he didn't. He cried quietly, not because he was weak, but because carrying everything alone had finally become impossible. Maya wrapped her arms around him and held him until the storm inside him softened. She couldn't erase the investigation. She couldn't change his father's heart. She couldn't stop what was coming, but she could remind him that even when the world questioned his integrity, there was still one place where he didn't have to earn love. 3 mornings later, just after sunrise, black SUVs pulled quietly to the curb outside Ethan and Maya's apartment building. Federal agents stepped out. Neighbors peeked through curtains. One agent approached the front door and knocked firmly. Inside, Ethan looked toward Maya. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. Some moments are too heavy for words. Ethan took a slow breath, walked to the door, and opened it. Before we continue this heartbreaking journey, I want to ask you something. If everyone around you believed you were guilty, but you knew you were innocent, would you keep fighting for the truth, or would you give up? And another question. Do you think Ethan's own father truly believes he's guilty, or is he choosing the family's reputation over his son? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I'd love to know what you think. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. Because in Chapter 6, you'll witness the most emotional moment of Ethan's life. As federal agents lead him into court, and the entire Caldwell family turns their backs on him, one unexpected person will walk through those courtroom doors and change everything. Trust me, you'll want to be there for that moment. The knock came at exactly 6:12 a.m., not loud, not violent, just 3 calm, deliberate knocks. The kind that left no room for pretending no one was home. Ethan stood frozen in the hallway. Maya quietly slipped her hand into his. Neither of them spoke. Outside, another knock echoed through the apartment. Then, a voice. "Federal agents. Mr. Ethan Caldwell, we'd like to speak with you." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. This wasn't unexpected. For days, he'd known this moment was coming. Still, knowing a storm is coming never makes the rain hurt less. He looked at Maya. "I'm sorry." She frowned. "For what?" "For bringing this into your life." She gently cupped his face. "Ethan, I married a man. Not a perfect life." Then she kissed his forehead. "Go answer the door." When Ethan opened it, 4 federal agents stood quietly outside. Their expressions were professional, not hostile. The woman standing in front stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes." She presented her badge. "Special Agent Laura Bennett. We have an arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court." She handed him several documents. "You are under arrest on charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and financial misconduct pending further judicial proceedings." The words sounded distant, almost unreal. Agent Bennett continued calmly. "You have the right to remain silent." As she read his rights, Ethan barely heard them. His attention drifted to the neighbors peeking through partially opened apartment doors. An elderly couple from across the hall. A young man holding his phone at chest level. Someone downstairs whispering into another apartment. Within minutes, the entire building would know. Maya stepped beside him. "May I ask a question?" The agent nodded politely. "Of course." "Can he change into different clothes before leaving?" "Yes." "We'll wait." No arguments, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, only dignity. Maya appreciated that. Inside the bedroom, Ethan changed into a dark navy suit. His hands trembled as he fastened the buttons. He stared into the mirror. The man looking back seemed older than he remembered. The confidence that once filled his eyes had been replaced by exhaustion. Maya walked in quietly carrying his wedding band. He looked confused. "I took it off last night." "I know. You couldn't sleep." She held it out. "You forgot." He slipped it back onto his finger. "I don't deserve you." She smiled softly. "No, you don't." He looked startled. Then she laughed. "Just like I don't deserve you." That's the beautiful thing about marriage. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing. She straightened his tie. "I'm still choosing you." His eyes filled with tears. As Ethan was escorted downstairs, camera flashes exploded outside the building. Someone had tipped off the media. Reporters crowded behind police barricades. Questions flew from every direction. "Mr. Caldwell, did you steal company funds? Are the allegations true? Did your family know? Will you plead guilty?" Microphones stretched toward him. Cameras followed every step. He kept walking. Agent Bennett quietly guided him toward the waiting SUV. Before getting inside, Ethan looked back. Maya stood near the entrance. Their eyes met. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She simply placed one hand over her heart. It was enough. Within an hour, every major news network interrupted regular programming. Breaking news. Billionaire heir arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud investigation. News anchors speculated endlessly. Financial experts debated possible prison sentences. Legal analysts discussed evidence they hadn't seen. Across America. By midday, Ethan arrived at the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. The building stood tall and imposing against the gray autumn sky. Inside, everything felt strangely quiet. Cold marble floors, long hallways, muted conversations. People moved with purpose, as though everyone's future inside these walls depended on paperwork and patience. Perhaps it did. Agent Bennett escorted Ethan into a private holding room, while attorneys completed preliminary paperwork. A public defender entered first. Then, moments later, Ethan's own attorney, Michael Rosen, hurried inside carrying several folders. "Ethan, I'm sorry I'm late." "It's all right." Michael dropped the folders onto the table. "The government's moving aggressively." "I figured." "They're requesting pre-trial detention." Ethan frowned. "They think I'm a flight risk?" "They're arguing your financial resources make you capable of leaving the country." "I wouldn't." "I know. Michael sighed. The challenge isn't convincing me. It's convincing the judge. Several minutes later, Michael closed the door. I need to ask you something. Ethan nodded. Did you authorize any of those transfers? No. Not one. Not one. Michael studied him carefully. I believe you. Ethan looked surprised. You do? I've represented people for 30 years. I know what deception sounds like. You sound exhausted, not dishonest. For the first time that day, shortly before the hearing, Ethan was escorted toward the courtroom. The hallway buzzed with reporters, attorneys, and court staff. Camera shutters echoed constantly. As he approached the courtroom doors, he noticed something unexpected. The entire first row had been reserved for the Caldwell family. His father, his mother, Daniel, several board members, longtime family friends. For just a moment, hope quietly stirred inside him. Maybe, despite everything, they had come. Not because they agreed with him, because they were family. Maybe today, he wouldn't be alone. The courtroom slowly filled. Spectators whispered. Reporters organized notebooks. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The prosecutor began outlining the government's allegations. Complex financial transactions, international accounts, forged authorizations, millions of dollars unaccounted for. Ethan listened quietly. He had heard most of it before. Then, almost instinctively, he glanced toward the first row. His father sat perfectly still. Expression unreadable. Victoria's eyes remained fixed on the floor. Daniel stared straight ahead. No one looked at Ethan. Not once. A strange feeling settled in his chest. It wasn't fear. It was something heavier. Loneliness. Halfway through the proceedings, the judge called a brief recess. People stretched. Attorneys gathered documents. Reporters hurried into the hallway to file updates. Ethan looked toward his family again. This time, Richard stood. He buttoned his suit jacket. Victoria slowly rose beside him. Daniel followed, without saying a word. They began walking toward the exit. Ethan frowned. Surely they were stepping outside for a moment. Surely. Richard reached the courtroom doors. He paused. For one brief second, Ethan believed his father would turn around. Instead, Richard placed a hand on the door, opened it, and walked out. Victoria followed with tears in her eyes. Daniel never looked back. One by one, the remaining family members quietly stood, and left with them. The reserved front row became completely empty. The heavy courtroom doors closed behind them. The sound echoed through the silent room. Ethan sat frozen. His attorney noticed first. Ethan? But there was nothing to say, because in that single heartbreaking moment, the richest family in America had just abandoned one of their own, and Ethan realized the trial hadn't even begun. Yet somehow, he had already lost the people he'd spent his entire life trying to make proud. For several long seconds, Ethan couldn't hear anything. The prosecutor was speaking. His attorney leaned over to whisper something. Court staff moved quietly between tables, but every sound seemed muffled, as though the entire courtroom had suddenly been submerged underwater. His eyes remained fixed on the empty front row. Just minutes earlier, his family's nameplates had occupied every seat. Now there was nothing, only polished wood, silence, and the unmistakable message their departure had delivered. You're on your own. Michael Rosen gently placed a hand on Ethan's arm. Ethan? No response. Ethan, he blinked. I'm sorry. You don't have anything to apologize for. Michael glanced toward the empty gallery. I'm sorry they left. Ethan swallowed hard. So am I. The older attorney hesitated before speaking again. I've represented people who lost fortunes. I've represented people who lost freedom. He lowered his voice. But losing your family's support. He sighed. That's a different kind of pain. Ethan looked down at his folded hands. They've been preparing me for this my whole life. Michael frowned. What do you mean? I just didn't know it. The judge returned from recess. Be seated. Everyone sat. The hearing resumed. The prosecutor argued that the evidence showed a clear pattern of financial misconduct. Michael calmly challenged the government's assumptions. He pointed out that the investigation was still ongoing, that no conviction had been reached, that every defendant remained innocent until proven guilty. Ethan listened, but his thoughts remained elsewhere. He kept replaying one image, his father's hand on the courtroom door, not turning around, not hesitating, just leaving. As the arguments continued, Ethan's mind drifted back to childhood. He was 9 years old. It was his first Little League baseball game. He had struck out in the final inning. His team lost. On the drive home, Richard never yelled, never criticized. He simply said, Winners prepare differently. That night, Ethan stayed in the backyard until sunset, practicing his swing alone. Not because he loved baseball, because he wanted his father to say, "I'm proud of you." He never did. Another memory surfaced. High school. Ethan graduated first in his class. The principal praised him in front of hundreds of families. After the ceremony, Richard shook his hand. "Well done." Then added, "College will be harder." The celebration ended before it had begun. Then college. Graduating with honors. Richard smiled. For exactly 3 seconds. The same length as when Ethan was 8 years old. 3 seconds. Ethan had spent decades chasing moments that disappeared almost as quickly as they arrived. And now, even those moments were gone. The judge called another brief pause while reviewing documents. Court officers moved in and out quietly. Reporters whispered near the back. Ethan stared at the defense table. Then, he heard the courtroom doors open again. He didn't look up immediately. He assumed another reporter had entered. Then he noticed something unusual. The quiet conversations around the room stopped. Every head turned toward the entrance. Even the judge looked up from his paperwork. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. His breath caught Maya. She stood just inside the doorway, wearing a simple navy blue dress and a light grey coat. No designer labels. No dramatic entrance. No entourage. She carried only a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows. She looked around the room until her eyes found Ethan. Then she smiled. Not because everything was okay, because he wasn't alone anymore. Without rushing, she walked down the center aisle. Every footstep echoed softly across the courtroom floor. Reporters watched in silence. Several people instinctively moved their bags aside as she passed. She reached the empty front row. The very seats Ethan's family had abandoned only minutes earlier. She sat down, alone, directly behind her husband. One woman. An entire row of empty chairs around her. Yet somehow, she made that side of the courtroom feel full again. Ethan turned slightly. Their eyes met. He could no longer hold back the emotion. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." Maya smiled gently. "I know." He looked confused. She continued. "I heard those words in my head the entire drive here." He stared at her. "So why did you?" She answered without hesitation. "Because love doesn't disappear the moment life becomes difficult." She leaned forward slightly. "When we stood before God 5 years ago, I promised to stand beside you. I don't remember adding an exception for courtrooms." A tear escaped before Ethan could stop it. Maya reached forward and gently squeezed his shoulder. "You don't have to be embarrassed." "I'm not embarrassed," he whispered. "I'm overwhelmed." She nodded. "Then let someone carry a little of the weight." The judge resumed the hearing. As legal arguments continued, Ethan noticed something remarkable. Every time doubt crept into his mind. Every time fear threatened to overwhelm him, he looked over his shoulder. Maya was still there. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She simply remained. Sometimes presence is more powerful than persuasion. After nearly 2 hours, the judge finally ruled. "Given the current stage of the investigation," he paused, "the court will release Mr. Caldwell on strict conditions pending trial." A collective murmur spread through the courtroom. No international travel, electronic monitoring, weekly reporting requirements, and a substantial secured bond. The gavel struck. "This hearing is adjourned." Almost instantly, reporters surged toward the exits. Camera crews scrambled to set up outside. Court officers directed people through designated hallways. Michael gathered his files. "This isn't a victory," he said quietly. "But it's not a defeat either." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." Michael smiled. "Thank your wife." He glanced toward Maya. "She reminded everyone in this courtroom that you're more than a case number." Outside the courtroom, dozens of reporters waited. The moment Ethan and Maya stepped into the hallway, microphones stretched toward them. "Mr. Caldwell, do you maintain your innocence? Mrs. Caldwell, do you still believe your husband? Are you afraid he'll go to prison?" Another reporter shouted, "Why are you standing by him when even his own family walked away?" The hallway became silent. Everyone waited for Maya's answer. She looked at the crowd calmly, then said, "Because I know the difference between allegations and character." The reporters immediately scribbled notes. She continued, "My husband doesn't need blind loyalty. He deserves fair judgment. And until the truth is known, I'll continue treating him the same way I did before any headline existed. No anger, no theatrics, just quiet conviction." As they walked toward the courthouse exit, Ethan spoke softly. You know they're going to criticize you now. I know. They'll question your judgment. I know. They'll say you're foolish. She smiled. They're allowed. He stopped walking. Maya. She turned toward him. I don't know how to thank you. She reached for his hand. Don't. He looked puzzled. You don't thank someone for keeping a promise. Outside, camera flashes lit up the courthouse steps. Inside, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Not relief. The trial was still ahead. The investigation was still ongoing. His reputation was still in ruins. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he no longer felt alone. And sometimes, hope doesn't arrive as a miracle. Sometimes, it walks quietly through a courtroom door and chooses the seat everyone else left empty. The drive home from the courthouse was unusually quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, because both Ethan and Maya knew some moments deserved silence before they deserved words. Outside the car window, New York moved as though nothing extraordinary had happened. People hurried across crosswalks. Street vendors sold hot pretzels. Tourists took pictures beneath towering skyscrapers. Somewhere, a musician played a saxophone near the subway entrance. Life continued. It always did. Even when someone's world had fallen apart. Ethan rested his head against the passenger window. I keep thinking about that courtroom. Maya kept her eyes on the road. I know. I thought seeing my family there meant... He stopped. They still believed in me. Maya didn't rush to answer. Instead, she asked quietly, what hurt the most? The fact that they left. He swallowed. No. She glanced at him. It was realizing. I wasn't surprised. The words hung in the air. I spent years convincing myself that if I worked hard enough, I'd finally become someone they couldn't walk away from. A tear slipped down his cheek. But today made me realize. I've been trying to earn something that was never mine to earn. Maya reached over and gently took his hand. Ethan, can I tell you something that might be difficult to hear? He nodded. Always. She smiled softly. I think you've confused approval with love. He frowned. Aren't they connected? They can be. She squeezed his hand. But healthy love doesn't disappear every time someone disappoints you. He stared ahead. So what does healthy love look like? She answered without hesitation. It tells the truth. It sets boundaries. It forgives. It grows. And on the hardest days, it stays. Ethan looked at her. Like you. She smiled. Like us. When they arrived home, Maya insisted on putting away their phones. No news. No social media. No television. Just tonight. Ethan looked uncertain. What if something important happens? If it's truly important. She smiled. Someone will call. Reluctantly, he agreed. She placed both phones inside a kitchen drawer. The apartment suddenly felt strangely peaceful. No notifications. No headlines. No endless opinions from strangers. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain tapping gently against the windows. I have an idea, Maya said. What? Come with me. She led him into the hallway closet and pulled out a dusty cardboard box. Ethan looked confused. I forgot we even had that. She laughed. Exactly. She carried it into the living room and opened it. Inside were photographs, concert tickets, vacation postcards, birthday cards, their wedding album. Maya picked up a framed picture from their honeymoon. You remember this? Ethan smiled. We got completely lost. For 6 hours. And your GPS died. She laughed. And you insisted we could find the cabin without asking anyone for directions. I was confident. You were stubborn. They both laughed. For the first time in weeks, it felt natural. They spent nearly 2 hours flipping through old memories. Pictures from neighborhood cookouts, movie nights with friends, volunteer events at the community center. A photo of Ethan covered in finger paint while 5 children laughed around him. Maya held it up. This one is my favorite. He studied the picture. I barely recognize that man. I do. She looked at him thoughtfully. He's still here. I don't think so. I know so. She gently tapped the photograph. This wasn't the man trying to impress anyone. This was the man who forgot he had a phone because he was helping children paint dinosaurs purple. Ethan smiled. They insisted dinosaurs weren't green. They were very passionate about it. As the evening grew darker, Maya lit 2 small candles on the coffee table. The apartment filled with a warm glow. She looked at Ethan. I want to try something. He raised an eyebrow. Therapist exercise? She grinned. Very much so. I'm nervous already. You'll survive. She handed him a notebook, not the old leather journal, a brand new one. What is this for? I want you to answer one question. He uncapped the pen. Only one? For tonight. He looked down at the blank page. What question? She spoke gently. Who are you? No, if no one is judging you? Ethan stared at the page. Minutes passed. Nothing came. He sighed. I don't know. I know. She smiled kindly. Try anyway. He began writing. At first, only a few words. Then, entire sentences. The silence stretched nearly half an hour. Finally, he closed the notebook. You want to read it? He hesitated, then nodded. She accepted the notebook carefully. The page read, I think I'm someone who likes helping people more than I ever admitted. I like quiet mornings. I like cooking breakfast, even though I'm terrible at it. I miss volunteering. I miss laughing without checking my phone. I think I've spent so much time becoming the man my father wanted, that I stopped asking who God created me to be. Maya looked up. Her eyes glistened with tears. That's the most honest thing you've ever written. Ethan looked embarrassed. It feels vulnerable. She nodded. It is. He looked toward the window. I've spent my entire life avoiding that feeling. I know. And now? She smiled. Now you're finally becoming free. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. Out of habit, he reached for his phone. Then remembered. It was still inside the kitchen drawer. Instead of opening the news, he opened the notebook. He read what he'd written the night before. For the first time in years, he wasn't reading financial projections. He was reading his own heart. It felt unfamiliar, but strangely comforting. Later that afternoon, Michael Rosen called. I have an update. Ethan put the phone on speaker so Maya could hear. The prosecution has shared part of their evidence. Ethan straightened. What did you find? There are more unauthorized transactions than we originally thought. His heart sank. But, Michael continued, our forensic expert found something interesting. What? Every fraudulent authorization happened while someone else was simultaneously logged into a secondary executive server. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means... Michael paused. Someone inside Caldwell Industries may have been operating alongside your credentials. Ethan looked at Maya. For the first time, there was something more powerful than hope. There was a direction, not proof, not yet, but a path toward the truth. He had spent months defending himself. Now, he might finally have the chance to prove that someone else had been hiding in the shadows all along. Michael's words lingered long after the call ended. There was someone else on the system. Ethan repeated the sentence several times in his mind, not because it proved his innocence. It didn't, not yet. But for the first time since the investigation began, the evidence wasn't pointing only at him. It was pointing somewhere else, somewhere inside Caldwell Industries. The next morning, Ethan and Maya met Michael at his law office overlooking the Hudson River. The conference room was covered with documents, bank statements, security logs, employee access records, printed emails. A large digital screen displayed a timeline of transactions. Michael stood beside it with another man in his late 50s. This is Dr. Alan Pierce, our forensic technology consultant. Dr. Pierce smiled politely. I've spent 30 years tracing digital financial fraud. He extended his hand to Ethan. I don't know whether you're innocent, but I know computers don't lie. Ethan appreciated the honesty. I'll take that. Dr. Pierce dimmed the lights. The timeline appeared on the screen. Every illegal transfer required 3 approvals. 1 belonged to you. 1 belonged to finance. The third came from an encrypted administrative override. Ethan frowned. I've never used an administrative override. I know. Dr. Pierce zoomed in on a cluster of timestamps. That's because these approvals happened within 2 seconds of each other. Michael crossed his arms. Impossible? For one person? Dr. Pierce nodded. Practically. Ethan leaned closer. So someone cloned my credentials? Possibly. Or someone inside the company had privileged access capable of impersonating executive approvals. Silence settled over the room. Someone on the inside. Not an outside hacker. Not a random criminal. Someone who understood Caldwell Industries. Someone who knew its systems. Someone Ethan probably trusted. After the meeting, Ethan walked outside with Maya. The breeze off the river carried the scent of rain. He stared across the water. I keep making the same mistake. She looked at him. What mistake? I keep asking, who did this to me? When maybe I should be asking, why? Maya considered that. Sometimes people hurt others because they're desperate. Sometimes because they're afraid. And sometimes, she sighed, because envy can become stronger than conscience. Ethan nodded slowly. I've never wanted anyone else's life. She smiled sadly. That's because you've spent your whole life trying to earn your own. That afternoon, Claire called unexpectedly. Ethan, it's good to hear your voice. You too. She sounded nervous. I've been thinking about something. What is it? The week before the investigation became public, there was a strange meeting. Ethan immediately paid attention. What meeting? Claire lowered her voice. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but Daniel asked everyone to leave the executive conference room. And I forgot my notebook. When I came back, the door wasn't completely closed. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Who was inside? Daniel and Mr. Harold Whitmore. Ethan frowned. The chief financial officer? Yes. What were they discussing? I couldn't hear everything, but I clearly heard Daniel say, once Ethan signs the restructuring package, everything becomes automatic. Silence. Claire continued, I thought it was just another corporate discussion. But after everything that's happened, I can't stop thinking about it. After hanging up, Ethan looked at Maya, Daniel, and Whitmore. Maya folded her arms. Could they be working together? I don't know. But if they are, it explains how someone inside the finance department could access executive approvals. Michael immediately arranged another meeting. This changes things, he said. If Claire is willing to testify, it strengthens our argument that the investigation focused on the wrong person. Ethan wasn't celebrating. Not yet. He had learned that hope without evidence could become another heartbreak. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat alone in his penthouse office. The city skyline stretched behind him. A glass of untouched whiskey rested on his desk. Harold Whitmore entered quietly. We have a problem. Daniel didn't look up. I assumed as much. Claire, called Ethan. Daniel finally raised his eyes. How do you know? I have someone watching. Daniel stood, slowly. His calm expression disappeared. I told you she was a risk. Harold sighed. She doesn't have proof. Not yet. Daniel walked toward the window. Proof can be created. So can doubt. Harold hesitated. What are you suggesting? Daniel turned. Before Ethan convinces everyone he's innocent, we make sure no one believes his witnesses. Harold's face tightened. This is becoming dangerous. Daniel smiled coldly. It became dangerous the day Ethan refused to resign. That evening, Maya prepared dinner, while Ethan reviewed the growing stack of legal documents. Halfway through the meal, the apartment buzzer rang. Neither of them expected visitors. I'll get it, Ethan said. A delivery driver stood downstairs holding a small envelope. No return address. It was left with us. Ethan thanked him and returned upstairs. Inside the apartment, he carefully opened the envelope. There was no letter. Only a single flash drive. And a handwritten note. 3 words. Trust no one. Maya looked uneasy. Should we plug it in? Ethan immediately shook his head. No. Michael had warned him countless times never to access unknown digital devices. Instead, he placed it into an evidence bag from Michael's office. We're giving this directly to Dr. Pierce. Maya smiled. That's progress. He looked confused. What is? A few months ago, you would have tried solving this alone. She reached across the table. Now you're asking for help. Ethan thought about that. She was right. For years, he believed strength meant carrying every burden by himself. Now he was beginning to understand something different. The following morning, Dr. Pierce examined the flash drive inside a secure forensic lab. Ethan, Maya, and Michael watched through a glass partition. Several tense minutes passed. Finally, Dr. Pierce emerged, holding a printed document. His expression had completely changed. What is it? Michael asked. Dr. Pierce laid the papers on the table. This isn't random. It's an archived system log. Ethan leaned forward. What does it show? Dr. Pierce looked directly at him. It shows that someone manually disabled portions of the company's security monitoring. For exactly 18 minutes. The same 18 minutes during which the first fraudulent transfers were approved. Michael's eyes widened. Can you identify who disabled it? Dr. Pierce nodded slowly. Not from this document alone. But whoever copied these logs wanted someone to find them. Ethan looked down at the anonymous note again. Trust no one. Someone inside Caldwell Industries had taken an enormous risk, not to destroy him, to help him. The question was, who? And would they still be alive, or willing to tell the truth before Daniel discovered what they had done? The anonymous flash drive changed everything. Not because it cleared Ethan's name. It didn't. But it shifted the investigation from one simple question, did Ethan commit fraud? To a far more complicated one. Who wanted everyone to believe he did? For the first time, federal investigators weren't looking in only one direction. They were beginning to look inside Caldwell Industries itself. And somewhere inside that company, someone was getting nervous. 3 days later, Michael called with unexpected news. The U.S. Attorney's Office wants another meeting. Ethan looked up from the kitchen table. That's a good sign. It means they're willing to listen. I thought prosecutors only built cases. They do. But good prosecutors also follow evidence. When evidence changes, they have to change. The meeting took place in a secure conference room inside the federal building. Present were Michael, Dr. Alan Pierce, 2 prosecutors, Special Agent Laura Bennett, and Ethan. Stacks of files covered the long oak table. Agent Bennett spoke first. Mr. Caldwell, we've reviewed the forensic report. She slid a folder toward him. The system logs you provided appear authentic. Ethan remained calm. Appear? We're still verifying them. Fair? The lead prosecutor leaned forward. If these logs are genuine, someone intentionally created a blind spot inside Caldwell Industries' security system. Michael nodded. Exactly. And that someone had authority beyond Mr. Caldwell's access level. Agent Bennett opened another folder. We've also reviewed executive badge records. Ethan frowned. What about them? Your building access card. She pointed to a timeline. It wasn't used during several transactions that were supposedly approved from your office. Ethan blinked. I wasn't even there. We know. Silence settled over the room. The prosecutor finally spoke. This presents a problem. Michael smiled slightly. A problem for whom? The prosecutor looked directly at Ethan. For our theory. After the meeting ended, Agent Bennett stopped Ethan in the hallway. Mr. Caldwell. He turned. I can't discuss an active investigation. I understand. But I wanted to tell you something. She hesitated. When we arrested you, I believed the evidence. He nodded. So did everyone else. She looked him in the eyes. I'm no longer certain we arrested the right person. It wasn't an apology. Federal agents rarely apologize during active cases. But Ethan understood what she meant. For the first time, someone inside the investigation was questioning the narrative. Meanwhile, inside Caldwell Industries headquarters, Richard Caldwell sat alone in the executive boardroom. The room that had once symbolized power now felt strangely empty. Since Ethan's suspension, profits had begun to decline. Executives argued constantly. Major investors demanded answers. Employees whispered in hallways. Confidence in leadership was fading. Richard stared at the quarterly reports without reading them. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Victoria entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. She placed one in front of him. You've barely eaten. I'm not hungry. You've barely slept. He didn't respond. She sat across from him. I met with Ethan. Richard looked up sharply. When? Yesterday. His jaw tightened. You didn't tell me. I knew how you'd react. Richard stood and walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. What did he say? He asked how you were. Richard laughed bitterly. That's all? Victoria nodded. He never once criticized you. He never blamed you. He just, she smiled sadly. Wanted to know if you were okay. Richard looked away. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Finally, he asked, did he ask me to come see him? No. Why not? Victoria's answer came quietly. Because he stopped expecting you to. Those words struck harder than any accusation. Across town, Daniel sat in his office reviewing news updates. The latest headlines troubled him. New digital evidence emerges in Caldwell fraud case. Investigators expand internal inquiry. He slammed his laptop shut. A knock sounded. Harold Whitmore entered. They're reopening interviews. Daniel's expression darkened. With who? Senior executives. And? They want mine. Daniel slowly stood. They're getting closer. Harold looked visibly shaken. What do we do? Daniel walked toward the minibar. He poured 2 glasses of water. not whiskey. His hands needed to stay steady. We don't panic. Harold accepted the glass. What if Claire talks? Daniel looked at him. Then we'll prove she's lying. And if she has evidence? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked a different question. Have you ever noticed how easily people believe someone who's already been labeled emotional? Harold frowned. I don't follow. Daniel smiled faintly. They won't attack her facts. They'll attack her credibility. Later that evening, Claire left Caldwell Industries after another exhausting day. The parking garage was unusually quiet. Most employees had already gone home. She unlocked her car. Just as she reached for the door, a familiar voice spoke behind her. Working late? Claire turned. Daniel. He smiled politely. Too politely. I didn't hear you. I know. He stepped closer. I've been looking for you. She forced a smile. What can I do for you? Daniel folded his hands casually. I heard you've been talking to Ethan. Her heart skipped. I've spoken to lots of people. I'm sure you have. His smile never changed, but I'd be careful. People tend to misunderstand conversations during stressful times. Claire's voice remained steady. Are you threatening me? Daniel chuckled. Of course not. I'm giving you friendly advice. He leaned in just enough for only her to hear. Sometimes the safest place is outside someone else's war. Then he walked away. Claire stood motionless until the elevator doors closed behind him. Only then did she realize. Her hands were trembling. That night, Claire called Ethan. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He knows. Ethan immediately stood from the couch. What happened? He confronted me. What did he say? Nothing specific. But... She took a shaky breath. He wanted me to know he was watching. Maya gently placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder as he listened. Ethan spoke carefully. Claire, you don't have to do this. If you're scared, no one will blame you. There was a long silence. Then Claire answered, I am scared, but I'm more scared of what happens if good people stay quiet. Maya closed her eyes. Those words reminded her of something her father had often said. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's deciding that fear doesn't get the final vote. The next morning, Michael received an urgent call from Dr. Pierce. His voice was unusually tense. I found something. What? The archived security logs. What about them? They weren't copied manually. Michael frowned. Then how? They were scheduled to be exported automatically. Months before the investigation ever became public. Michael's heartbeat quickened. Meaning? Dr. Pierce took a slow breath. Whoever set that export, already knew the fraud would eventually be discovered. Michael immediately looked toward Ethan. Their eyes met across the room. Neither of them spoke, because they had both reached the same terrifying conclusion. The person secretly helping Ethan had been planning for this moment long before anyone realized a crime had even been committed. The room fell silent. Michael slowly leaned back in his chair, trying to process what Dr. Pierce had just said. You're telling me someone created an automatic backup of those security logs before anyone even knew there was a fraud investigation? Dr. Pierce nodded. Not only that, he tapped a few keys on his laptop. The backup was programmed to activate only if the original logs were altered or deleted. Ethan frowned. So whoever did this expected someone to cover their tracks. Exactly. Dr. Pierce turned the screen toward them. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a contingency plan. A very intelligent one. Maya looked at the timeline on the screen. Whoever did this wasn't trying to expose the fraud immediately. They were waiting. Dr. Pierce nodded. They were waiting until it became impossible to ignore. Michael folded his arms. Can we trace who created the backup? Not directly. Why not? The account used to schedule it belonged to a retired systems administrator. Ethan's eyebrows rose. Retired? 3 years ago. So someone stole his credentials? Either that, Dr. Pierce replied, or he willingly gave someone access. The retired administrator's name was Samuel Brooks, 71 years old, widower, 42 years at Caldwell Industries before retiring. According to company records, he'd been known for one thing above all else: absolute integrity. Richard Caldwell himself had once called him the most trustworthy employee this company has ever had. Ethan remembered him immediately. Mr. Brooks had taught young interns how the company's systems worked. He believed shortcuts eventually became scandals. He used to say, if you build something honestly, you can sleep peacefully. Ethan hadn't seen him in years. Michael arranged a meeting that same afternoon. Samuel Brooks lived in a quiet neighborhood in Connecticut. His modest white house stood in sharp contrast to the luxury Ethan had grown up around. The front yard was carefully maintained. Tomato plants lined one side of the garden. A weathered American flag hung from the porch. Samuel answered the door himself. His grey hair had thinned considerably, but his posture remained straight. When he saw Ethan, his expression softened. "Mr. Caldwell." Ethan smiled faintly. "Please." "It's just Ethan." Samuel looked from Ethan to Michael and Maya. "I had a feeling this day would come." Those words immediately caught everyone's attention. "You did?" Michael asked. Samuel nodded. "I've been expecting visitors." Inside the house, they gathered around a simple wooden dining table. Samuel poured coffee for everyone before sitting down. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed relieved. Michael spoke first. "Mr. Brooks, did you create the automated backup of Caldwell Industries security logs?" Samuel looked at Ethan for several seconds, then quietly answered, "No." The room fell still. "But," he continued, "I know who asked me to." Ethan leaned forward. "Who?" Samuel looked toward the window. "I'm not ready to say." Michael frowned. "Mr. Brooks, an innocent man's future depends on this." Samuel nodded slowly. "I know. I've carried that weight every day." Ethan spoke gently. "Why keep it secret?" Samuel's eyes became distant. "Because I made a promise." "A promise?" "To someone who believed they wouldn't live long enough to tell the truth themselves." Maya exchanged a glance with Ethan. "What do you mean?" Samuel stood and walked toward an old bookshelf. From the bottom shelf, he removed a small locked metal box. He placed it on the table. "I've been waiting for the right time." He unlocked it with a tiny brass key. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a flash drive, and a leather-bound journal. Samuel rested his hand on the journal. This belonged to Evelyn Carter. Ethan searched his memory. "The former head of internal audit?" Samuel nodded. "She retired 2 years ago." "No." Samuel's voice grew quiet. "She never made it to retirement." A heavy silence settled over the room. Maya gently asked, "What happened to her?" Samuel took a slow breath. "Officially, she died from cancer." He paused. "And she did. But before she passed, she asked me to protect something." He slid the journal toward Ethan. "She told me that if anything ever happened to you, or if anyone tried to destroy your reputation, I was to make sure this reached you." Ethan stared at the worn leather cover. His hands hesitated before touching it. It felt less like a notebook, and more like a responsibility. Carefully, he opened the first page. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. The opening sentence made everyone in the room freeze. "If you are reading this, someone has finally decided to sacrifice an innocent man to protect the guilty." No one spoke. Ethan slowly turned the page. Another entry. "I have spent months uncovering financial irregularities that reach far beyond accounting errors. The problem is not the system. The problem is the people controlling it." Michael immediately took out his phone and began photographing each page. This could become critical evidence. Samuel nodded. "Read further." The journal detailed suspicious meetings, unexplained account changes, late-night server access, pressure placed on auditors to ignore discrepancies. Several names appeared repeatedly. Harold Whitmore, 2 board members, outside consultants, but one name appeared more often than any other, not because Evelyn accused him, because she questioned him. Daniel Caldwell. Entry after entry described Daniel requesting unusual financial reports, asking auditors to delay reviews, insisting on bypassing normal procedures for efficiency. None of it proved a crime, but, together, it formed a disturbing pattern. Then Ethan reached the final completed page. The handwriting looked weaker, as though Evelyn had been struggling to write. It read, "I still don't know whether Daniel is the architect, or merely someone's willing participant. But I know this. Ethan Caldwell is asking the wrong question. He believes someone is trying to steal the company. They aren't. They're trying to steal the future of the company." Below that, one final handwritten sentence. "The answers aren't in finance, they're in the foundation." Ethan frowned. "The foundation?" Michael looked equally confused. "The Caldwell Family Foundation?" Samuel slowly nodded. "I believe so." But Evelyn never explained what she meant. As they prepared to leave, Samuel stopped Ethan at the front door. "There is one more thing." Ethan turned. "Evelyn asked me to tell you something." "What was it?" Samuel smiled sadly. "She said, 'Tell Ethan that kindness is never wasted, even when power makes it seem foolish.'" Ethan lowered his eyes. I used to bring her coffee every Monday. Samuel nodded. She never forgot. She told me that was the day she realized you were different from the rest of the executives. The drive back to New York was quiet. The journal rested on Ethan's lap. Maya finally broke the silence. What are you thinking? He looked out at the passing trees. That I've spent months trying to prove I didn't commit a crime. She waited. But maybe proving my innocence isn't enough anymore. What do you mean? He closed the journal gently. If Evelyn was right, then this was never just about framing me. It was about protecting something much bigger. That evening, after Dr. Pierce finished making secure digital copies of the journal, Michael received an encrypted email from Agent Laura Bennett. It contained only one sentence. Do not share the journal with anyone else yet. We have identified a leak inside the investigation. Michael's face drained of color. He immediately called Ethan. There may be someone feeding information from inside the federal investigation. Ethan felt a chill run through him. If that was true, then whoever was behind the conspiracy wasn't just manipulating Caldwell Industries. They had influence reaching far beyond the company. And suddenly, finding the truth had become even more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The call from Michael lasted less than 2 minutes, but its impact lingered all night. There may be a leak inside the investigation. Those 7 words changed everything. Until now, Ethan had assumed the people searching for the truth were all on the same side. Now, he wasn't sure whom he could trust. The next morning, Michael gathered everyone at his office before sunrise. Present were Ethan, Maya, Dr. Alan Pierce, Claire, and for the first time since the investigation began, Special Agent Laura Bennett. She entered through a private entrance instead of the lobby. The moment she closed the conference room door, she spoke plainly. This meeting never happened. No one argued. She continued. The leak appears to be small. But it's real. Michael folded his arms. Do you know who it is? Laura shook her head. Not yet. We've narrowed it to a handful of people with access to investigative files. She looked directly at Ethan. That's why you need to assume anything you tell the government could eventually reach the people trying to frame you. The room became silent. Trust had become another casualty of the investigation. Claire shifted uneasily in her chair. Then how do we move forward? Laura walked to the whiteboard. We stop reacting. She drew a simple chessboard. We start thinking 3 moves ahead. Ethan smiled faintly. My father used to love chess. Laura looked at him. So do the people you're dealing with. She placed a marker on one side of the board. They expect you to defend yourself. She moved another piece. They expect witnesses. Another piece. They expect forensic evidence. Then she smiled. They won't expect patience. Dr. Pierce connected his laptop to the projector. I finished examining Evelyn Carter's journal. He displayed a scanned page. The foundation. Michael nodded. Everything points back to the Caldwell Family Foundation. Ethan frowned. But the foundation is a charity. It funds children's hospitals, scholarships, veterans' housing. Laura replied quietly. Sometimes the safest place to hide money is where no one expects to find it. Michael looked surprised. You think charitable funds were involved? Laura shook her head. Not necessarily stolen. She tapped the journal. But foundations can own subsidiaries. They can move assets. They can authorize grants. They can create layers of transactions. Dr. Pierce nodded. And layers make money harder to trace. Ethan stared at Evelyn's final sentence again. The answers aren't in finance. They're in the foundation. For the first time, it made sense. If someone wanted to manipulate billions without attracting attention, they wouldn't do it through ordinary company accounts. They'd do it through an organization people automatically trusted. Across Manhattan, Richard Caldwell sat alone in his office. The morning newspaper lay unopened. For decades he had begun every day reading business headlines. Today, he couldn't. Everything reminded him of Ethan. His assistant knocked gently. Sir. What? You have a visitor. I don't have appointments. He said it couldn't wait. Richard sighed. Send him in. The door opened. Samuel Brooks stepped inside. Richard immediately stood. Sam? It's been years. Samuel smiled politely. It has. Richard walked around his desk. It's good to see you. I wish the circumstances were different. Richard noticed Samuel's expression. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Samuel remained standing. I came because I owe you honesty. Richard frowned. What are you talking about? Samuel reached into his coat pocket. He placed an old employee identification badge on the desk. I should have come sooner. Richard stared at it. I don't understand. Samuel met his eyes. Evelyn Carter wasn't paranoid. Richard's expression hardened. What did you say? She found something before she died. Richard slowly sat back down. What did she find? Samuel hesitated. I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I can tell you this. He leaned forward. The son you abandoned may be the only person who can save your company. Richard didn't speak. He simply stared at Samuel. Finally, he whispered, Do you know who framed him? Samuel answered carefully. I know enough to believe he didn't do it. Richard looked away. His hands trembled slightly. A rare sight. Samuel had worked beside him for 4 decades. He had seen Richard negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking. Yet hearing that Ethan might truly be innocent seemed to shake him more than any financial crisis. Samuel quietly added, There's still time. Richard looked up. For what? To become his father again. Meanwhile, Maya received an unexpected phone call at the community therapy center where she had recently resumed volunteering. Mrs. Caldwell? This is Principal Angela Morris from Jefferson Elementary. Maya smiled. Hello, Angela. I hope everything's all right. It is. I just wanted you to know. Maya. The children have been asking about Ethan. Maya blinked. Asking about him? Every week. They remember how he helped build the reading garden. Zen. One little boy keeps asking, when is Mr. Ethan coming back to read pirate stories? Maya laughed softly through unexpected tears. I'll tell him. Please do. And tell him. Children usually recognize character long before adults do. That evening, Maya shared the conversation with Ethan. He smiled for the first time all day. They remembered me? They did. He shook his head. I only volunteered there a few times. Maya corrected him gently. No, you showed up consistently. Children notice consistency. She handed him a small envelope. What is this? The principal asked the children to make something. Inside were handmade cards, crayon drawings, construction paper hearts. One drawing showed Ethan reading a book beneath a giant oak tree. The caption read, Mr. Ethan makes everyone feel brave. Another read, Please come back soon. A third simply said, We miss you. Ethan quietly wiped away tears. They don't even know what's happening. Exactly. Maya replied. They only remember how you treated them. Late that night, as Ethan carefully returned the children's drawings to the envelope, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Instead, he answered, Hello? For several seconds, no one spoke. Then came a familiar voice. Dad? Ethan froze. It was Richard. Neither of them spoke immediately. Years of distance filled the silence. Finally, Richard broke it. I need to ask you something. Ethan closed his eyes. What is it? His father's voice sounded quieter than Ethan had ever heard before. When you were 12, you accidentally broke your grandfather's pocket watch. Ethan frowned. I remember. You told everyone it was your fault. Yes, Richard swallowed. It wasn't. Ethan's heart skipped. What? I knew. I always knew. You were protecting Daniel. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then Richard whispered words Ethan had waited his entire life to hear. I'm beginning to wonder. How many times you've been protecting him ever since? Richard's words echoed through the phone. I'm beginning to wonder how many times you've been protecting him ever since. Ethan couldn't answer. Not because he didn't know what to say, because he had never imagined hearing his father question Daniel. For years, Daniel had been the golden son, the easy smile, the charming executive, the one who always seemed to say exactly what people wanted to hear. Ethan, on the other hand, had been expected to prove himself over and over again. Now, for the first time, Richard was asking whether he had been wrong. Dad? Ethan finally said, What made you think of the watch? Richard let out a slow breath. Samuel Brooks. He reminded me. I'd forgotten. You took the blame because Daniel was crying. He was afraid your grandfather would never forgive him. Ethan smiled faintly at the memory. He was only 9. And you were 12. Richard's voice grew heavier. I remember thinking, that's what an older brother should do. He paused. What I failed to ask was why you were always the one carrying someone else's mistakes. Ethan looked toward Maya, who was sitting quietly across the room. She could tell from his expression that something significant was happening. Dad? I never blamed Daniel for that. I know, Richard replied. That's part of the problem. There was another long silence. Finally, Richard spoke again. I owe you an apology. Ethan's heart pounded. His father had never apologized. Not once. Not when he missed birthdays. Not when he skipped Ethan's college graduation dinner for a board meeting. Not when he criticized instead of encouraged. Never. I'm listening. Richard's voice trembled. When this investigation started, I believed the evidence more than I believed my son. I told myself I was protecting the company. But the truth is, I was protecting the version of the world that made sense to me. If you were innocent, then I'd have to admit I failed to see what was happening inside my own family. Ethan closed his eyes. Those words hurt, but they also healed something he hadn't realized was still bleeding. I can't change what I did, Richard continued, but I want to help. Ethan opened his eyes. Why now? Richard answered honestly. Because I finally asked myself a question I should have asked months ago. What question? If Daniel were truly innocent, why has he never once looked me in the eye and said so? After they ended the call, Ethan remained seated for several minutes. Maya walked over. Your father? He nodded. He apologized. She smiled softly. How do you feel? He thought carefully before answering. I don't know. I wanted that moment my entire life. And now that it's happened, it doesn't erase the past. She nodded. It isn't supposed to. He looked at her. Then what does it do? It opens a door. The decision to walk through it belongs to both of you. The following morning, Richard requested an emergency meeting with Caldwell Industries board. Every director attended, including Daniel. The atmosphere was tense. Rumors about the investigation had already shaken investor confidence. Richard stood at the head of the table. I've made mistakes. Several board members exchanged surprised glances. Richard was not known for public admissions. I placed too much confidence in assumptions. I'm correcting that today. Daniel shifted in his chair. What are you proposing? Richard looked directly at him. A complete independent forensic audit. Daniel's expression remained calm. Isn't that what the government is already doing? No. Richard replied. The government is investigating a crime. I'm investigating my company. One board member raised a hand. Richard, this could expose confidential business operations. Richard nodded. If we've done nothing wrong, we have nothing to fear. Daniel spoke again. This sends the wrong message to investors. Richard didn't take his eyes off him. Perhaps. But hiding from the truth sends an even worse one. After the meeting ended, Daniel caught up with Richard in the hallway. Can we talk? Richard stopped walking. What is it? Daniel lowered his voice. You're making decisions based on emotion. No, Richard answered calmly. I'm making them because I ignored my instincts for too long. Daniel frowned. You think Ethan's innocent. I think he deserves the same presumption of innocence everyone else deserves. Daniel forced a laugh. So, Samuel Brooks got to you. Richard didn't respond. That silence was answer enough. Meanwhile, Dr. Pierce continued examining Evelyn Carter's journal. Late that afternoon, he called Michael. I found something hidden. What kind of something? The journal wasn't just handwritten. It contains microscopic indentations. Michael frowned. Indentations? When someone writes on paper, the pressure often leaves impressions on the pages underneath. I used specialized lighting. And? Dr. Pierce took a slow breath. There was a page removed from the journal. Michael's pulse quickened. Can you recover what it said? Not perfectly. But enough. 2 hours later, Ethan, Maya, Michael, and Agent Bennett gathered in Drive. Pierce's lab. The recovered writing appeared faintly on a large monitor. Most of it was incomplete. Broken words. Partial sentences. Then one line became readable. If anything happens to me, search the archive beneath the original Foundation Charter. Everyone stared at the screen. Laura Bennett spoke first. The Foundation Charter? Michael looked at Ethan. Where is the original kept? Ethan answered immediately. In the Caldwell family archives. At the estate. Silence filled the room. Then everyone reached the same conclusion. Whatever Evelyn had hidden, it was inside the one place Ethan had avoided since his family abandoned him. His childhood home, the Caldwell estate. That evening, Ethan parked outside the enormous iron gates. The mansion looked exactly as it had when he was a boy. Perfect lawns, perfect gardens, perfect windows. For years he had believed perfection lived here. Now he knew better. Maya reached over from the passenger seat. You don't have to do this alone. He smiled. I know. She squeezed his hand. That's growth. Richard was already waiting at the front entrance. When Ethan stepped out of the car, neither man moved for several seconds. There was no dramatic embrace, no instant reconciliation. Just two men carrying years of silence. Finally, Richard walked down the front steps. He stopped in front of his son. I wasn't sure you'd come. Ethan answered quietly. I almost didn't. Richard nodded. I would have understood. Another pause. Then, awkwardly, uncomfortably, Richard extended his hand. Ethan looked at it, then slowly shook it. Richard gave a faint smile. I suppose that's a start. Ethan nodded. A start. As they walked toward the front doors together, neither of them noticed the figure watching from an upstairs window. Daniel. His face had gone pale, because for the first time since his plan began, his father and brother were standing on the same side, and if they found whatever Evelyn Carter had hidden beneath the Foundation archives, the lies he had spent years constructing could collapse overnight. The massive oak doors of the Caldwell estate closed behind Ethan with a familiar, hollow echo. For a moment, he was 12 years old again, standing in the grand foyer, trying not to make mistakes, trying not to disappoint anyone. The marble floors still gleamed. The crystal chandelier still hung above the staircase. Portraits of generations of Caldwells still lined the walls. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet everything felt different. This was no longer the house where Ethan had spent his childhood. It was now a crime scene, waiting to reveal its secrets. Richard led the way toward the West Wing. The family archives are downstairs. Maya walked beside Ethan. Michael, Agent Laura Bennett, and Dr. Alan Pierce followed closely behind. No one spoke. The silence carried the weight of decades. At the end of a long hallway, Richard unlocked a heavy steel door hidden behind walnut paneling. You've probably never been in here, he said quietly. Ethan shook his head. Dad used to say the archives weren't for children. Richard lowered his eyes. I said a lot of things I regret. The room beyond looked more like a private museum than a storage vault. Climate-controlled shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Leather-bound ledgers, original company charters, Foundation records dating back nearly 70 years. Boxes labeled in meticulous handwriting. Everything had been preserved with extraordinary care. Dr. Pierce smiled softly. History leaves fingerprints. Laura added, and sometimes those fingerprints solve crimes. Richard walked to a glass display case. Inside rested the original Caldwell Family Foundation charter. Its gold seal had faded with age. This is it. Dr. Pierce carefully examined the wooden pedestal beneath the document. He tapped it lightly, then again. The second tap sounded different. Hollow. Everyone looked at him. He examined the underside of the pedestal until his fingers found a tiny recessed latch. He pressed it. A soft click echoed through the room. The base slowly slid open. Inside was a small metal lockbox. No one moved. Laura Bennett immediately put on evidence gloves. She carefully lifted the box onto the table. It's locked. Samuel Brooks' words suddenly returned to Ethan. She wanted someone to find it. Maya looked at Richard. Do you know where the key might be? Richard thought for a moment. Then his expression changed. Evelyn, what about her? Ethan asked. She insisted every archive had 2 keys. One stayed with the Foundation. The other, his voice trailed off, was kept in the founder's study. Minutes later, Richard unlocked a drawer in his late father's old desk. Inside, beneath neatly organized documents, rested a tiny brass key wrapped in faded blue cloth. He picked it up carefully. My father always said, important things deserve a second chance to be found. He handed the key to Laura. She inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly. The room held its breath. Inside the box were 3 items. A sealed envelope, a portable hard drive, and a notarized affidavit signed by Evelyn Carter. Michael carefully opened the affidavit first. His eyes widened as he read. What is it? Ethan asked. Michael looked up slowly. This changes everything. The affidavit described months of internal investigations conducted by Evelyn before her death. She had documented a sophisticated scheme involving shell companies, forged vendor contracts, and charitable grant diversions. But what stunned everyone most wasn't the fraud itself. It was who had authorized it. Not Daniel, not Richard, not Ethan. The signature authorizing the first fraudulent transactions belonged to Harold Whitmore, the chief financial officer. Laura immediately took the affidavit. This is admissible evidence. Dr. Pierce nodded. If the supporting documents match. Michael connected the portable hard drive to a secure forensic laptop. Folders appeared one after another. Internal emails, financial ledgers, board memorandums, encrypted spreadsheets, everything Evelyn had quietly copied before her death. Dr. Pierce began reviewing the files. After several tense minutes, he stopped. I found correspondence between Whitmore and someone using the alias Atlas. Laura frowned. Can we identify Atlas? Dr. Pierce opened another file. The emails were encrypted, but one attachment wasn't. He clicked it open. It was a scanned contract, signed, dated, approved. The alias had accidentally attached a document containing a real digital signature. The room became silent. Slowly, Dr. Pierce turned the screen toward everyone. The signature belonged to Daniel Caldwell. Richard staggered backward. No. Oh, his voice barely rose above a whisper. No. He stared at the screen as if refusing to believe what his own eyes were showing him. Daniel, his youngest son. The son he had defended. The son he had trusted without question. Laura immediately photographed the screen. Michael looked at Ethan. This is the first direct connection. But we still need motive. As if answering him, Maya noticed another folder labeled Personal. She opened it. Inside was a video file, recorded 18 months earlier. The timestamp matched just weeks before Evelyn's death. Laura hesitated. We should watch it. The video began. Evelyn Carter appeared on the screen. She looked noticeably weaker than in photographs, but her voice remained steady. If you're seeing this, then I was right. She smiled sadly. I prayed I wouldn't be. She took a slow breath. I've spent the last year uncovering financial manipulation inside Caldwell Industries. My greatest mistake was assuming greed was the motive. She looked directly into the camera. It wasn't. It was resentment. The video continued. Daniel Caldwell believes the company should have been his. He believes Ethan was chosen because their father admired integrity more than charm. She paused to catch her breath. I don't believe Daniel began as a criminal. I believe he became one decision at a time. Each compromise became easier than the last. She closed her eyes briefly. If I don't survive to testify, please remember this. Evil rarely arrives all at once. It usually begins the first time someone convinces themselves that the ends justify the means. The room remained completely silent. Then the recording ended. Richard lowered himself into a chair. His face was pale. Tears filled his eyes. I did this. Everyone turned toward him. He looked at Ethan. I taught you both that winning mattered more than honesty. I rewarded results. I overlooked character. I kept telling myself I was building leaders. He shook his head slowly. I was building competitors. Ethan had imagined this moment countless times. He thought it would bring satisfaction, vindication. Instead, it brought sadness, because his father's greatest punishment wasn't losing a company. It was realizing he had nearly lost both of his sons. Just then, Laura's phone rang. She listened for only a few seconds before standing. Her expression hardened. What happened? Michael asked. She slipped the phone into her pocket. Daniel just left Caldwell Industries. So? He emptied his office. She looked directly at Ethan. And, according to airport security, someone using his passport just purchased a one-way international flight departing in less than 3 hours. The room fell silent. After months of lies, Daniel had finally realized the truth was catching up to him. And now, he was running. For one long moment, no one moved. Daniel was running. The words hung in the air like the final crack in a dam that had been weakening for years. Agent Laura Bennett was the first to act. She reached for her phone. Notify airport security. Request an immediate hold on Daniel Caldwell. Contact Customs and Border Protection. Nobody lets him board that plane. She ended the call and looked at Ethan. If the evidence in this room is authentic, his window to leave the country is closing fast. Richard slowly stood. I have to find him. Laura shook her head. No, he won't listen to you. Right now, you're not his father. You're the CEO whose company may help convict him. Richard lowered his eyes. She was right. It was a painful truth, but it was still the truth. Meanwhile, at a private terminal outside the city, Daniel Caldwell walked briskly toward a waiting jet. Harold Whitmore struggled to keep up. This is moving too fast. Daniel never slowed down. No, it isn't moving fast enough. Harold glanced over his shoulder. What if they stop us? Daniel finally looked at him. They don't have enough. They have suspicion. They don't have certainty. Harold swallowed nervously. And if they do, Daniel's expression hardened. Then we should have left yesterday. Back at the Caldwell estate, Dr. Pierce completed one final forensic comparison. He looked up from his laptop. I have confirmation. Michael turned. On what? The emails. The metadata matches. The files haven't been altered. Laura nodded. That satisfies the chain of authenticity. She immediately forwarded the findings to the federal prosecutor. Within minutes, a federal judge signed new arrest warrants, not for Ethan, for Daniel Caldwell and Harold Whitmore. At the airport, 2 black SUVs rolled quietly onto the private terminal access road. Federal agents stepped out. Airport security officers sealed the gate. Daniel noticed them immediately. His pace slowed, then stopped. Harold whispered, "They're here." Daniel closed his eyes. For just a second. Then he smiled, not confidently, resigned. I suppose Evelyn finally won. Agent Bennett stepped forward. Daniel Caldwell. She held up the warrant. You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and related federal offenses. Harold attempted to step backward. Another agent stopped him. Daniel looked around the quiet airfield. No dramatic escape, no shouting, no running, only consequences. He slowly extended his hands. The handcuffs clicked into place. For the first time in years, he looked tired, not defeated by the agents, defeated by the weight of his own choices. As Daniel was escorted toward the vehicle, he asked one question. Did Ethan see the evidence? Agent Bennett answered honestly. Yes. Daniel nodded once. Good. She looked surprised. Good? He gave a hollow laugh. I've spent my whole life trying to beat him. I never realized. He wasn't competing with me. Several days later, the federal courthouse was once again filled with reporters. Only this time, the headlines were different. All charges against Ethan Caldwell dismissed. New evidence exonerates billionaire executive. Former CFO and executive heir charged in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Outside the courthouse, microphones crowded around Ethan. One reporter asked, Mr. Caldwell, do you feel vindicated? Ethan thought for a moment before answering, I feel grateful. Another reporter frowned. Not angry? He smiled gently. I spent too much time carrying anger. I'm not interested in carrying it any longer. Another reporter asked, do you have a message for your brother? The crowd became silent. Everyone expected revenge, bitterness, a public condemnation. Instead, Ethan said, I hope he tells the truth. And I hope, one day, he becomes the man he was capable of being. No insults, no celebration, only compassion. Maya smiled quietly beside him. That response sounded exactly like the man she had fallen in love with. Weeks later, Richard visited Ethan's apartment, not the mansion, not the corporate office, the apartment. He stood awkwardly at the doorway, holding a small wooden box. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me. Ethan smiled. I wasn't sure either. Richard nodded. Fair enough. They sat together in the living room. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Richard slid the wooden box across the coffee table. I found this while cleaning your grandfather's study. Ethan opened it. Inside was the old pocket watch, the same one from years ago. Completely restored. Richard smiled sadly. It wasn't broken beyond repair after all. Ethan looked up. The meaning wasn't lost on either of them. Neither was their relationship. I'm trying to learn something, Richard said quietly. What? How to be your father. Ethan laughed softly. I'm 34. I know. Richard smiled. I suppose I'm running a little behind. They both laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And sometimes, real is where healing begins. Months passed. Caldwell Industries completed a full restructuring. Richard stepped down as CEO, not because he was forced to, because he believed the company needed new leadership. The board unanimously offered the position to Ethan. He surprised everyone by declining. Instead, he recommended an experienced executive from outside the family. The company needs trust more than it needs another Caldwell. The board agreed. It was the first major decision in years that everyone supported. Ethan chose a different path. With Maya beside him, he established the Evelyn Carter Center for Ethical Leadership, dedicated to training young business leaders in integrity, transparency, and responsible leadership. Samuel Brooks attended the opening ceremony. So did Claire. Even Richard sat quietly in the front row. After Ethan finished speaking, a little boy from Jefferson Elementary raised his hand. Mr. Ethan? Yes? Are heroes always rich? The room laughed gently. Ethan smiled. No. What makes someone a hero? Is choosing what's right when it costs them something. Maya reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently, just as he had done in that courtroom months earlier. That evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Ethan and Maya sat together on a park bench overlooking the river. No reporters, no court dates, no investigators, just the sound of children laughing in the distance. Ethan looked at his wife. You know, you saved me. She smiled. I didn't. You did. She shook her head. I simply kept my promise. He thought back to the courtroom, the empty front row, the lonely silence. Then the sound of one pair of footsteps walking toward him. One woman choosing the seat everyone else had abandoned. He took her hand. I'm glad you walked into that courtroom. She rested her head on his shoulder. I'm glad you opened the door. Together, they watched the sunset, not as people who had escaped hardship, but as people who had been changed by it. Because they had learned that wealth can build houses. Power can build empires. But only love, truth, and forgiveness can rebuild a life. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. What was the most powerful moment for you? Was it when Ethan's family abandoned him in court, when Maya chose to stand by his side, or when the truth finally came to light? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them, and your perspective could encourage someone else who needs hope today. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next emotional journey filled with love, resilience, and unforgettable life lessons. And remember, the people who truly love you won't disappear when life gets difficult. They'll choose the seat beside you when everyone else walks away. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.